a number of action items as well that we're going to be taking up. So we have with us remotely Representative Lanfer and Senator Sears. We're not sure whether Senator Westman will be able to join us or not. He was not quite sure what his other personal demands might be. But everyone else is here. So I'm going to get started. And our first order of business is to approve the minutes of our January 9th meeting. They were relatively short. But I have a motion to approve. Thank you. A second? Second. So motion's been made and seconded to approve the minutes of our February 9th meeting. All those in favor say aye. Aye. So the minutes are approved. Our next item is fiscal updates. We have Hardy Merrill from Department of Finance and Management, who is with us today, and we're going to have an update on preliminary funds. Oh, my goodness, Hardy, you're like miles away.
And you can't.
No, you can't really. So.
Sure. I'm fine.
You want me to go back down there?
I'll try to speak loudly so that you can hear that.
Apparently, this is.
Usually they still.
The House does things bigger, I guess. So, good morning, Hardy.
So, good morning. I welcome. Thank you for welcoming me here this morning, and I hope all members of the committee have weathered the storm, personal lives as well as can be. So I will jump right in, starting with the first item on my agenda, which is the report on fiscal year 23 closeout. And what I was going to do was high-level summary of GF, EF, and TF General Education and Transportation Fund operating statements. So you should have a document that is a 4-page document.
Exhibit A1.
Yeah.
Exhibit A1. And I'm going to just jump right in, skipping the cover page to page 2 of 4, which is the General Fund operating statement. And once, if you're all there, I'll start with the.
Everyone have this document? Okay.
So I'll start by highlighting the very first line, which is the top line general fund revenue at fiscal year 23 closeout. That's the 2.224 billion number that you see in the upper right-hand corner at the top of the FY23 column. So that compares to our consensus forecast by being $43 million higher than the 2.181 billion forecast that we built the budget on this year. So certainly continuing the pattern of strong revenue performance exceeding forecasts. On the next line, the direct applications line of 70.46 million is actually, you'll see that's down quite a bit, 26 million from the prior year direct app figure. And it's also down quite a bit from the number that was on the GF operating statement prepared by JFO back in May of 90 million for direct applications. And so really the most material sort of point to highlight in a review of the operating statement is that that's intentional. There was a unique feature built into Act 78 this year in the C section, and it was actually Act 3 and Act 78 that directed the Commissioner of Finance and Management to only transfer to the general fund those amounts from the funds referenced in D101B2, which are AG Court Order, Secretary of State Services Fund, Unclaimed Property, and the 3 DFR funds. We were directed to only transfer what was needed to close the fiscal year and not do a complete sweep to the general fund as has been the practice previously. And the reason for that was that amounts in excess of what was needed to close the general fund were to be transferred instead to the cash fund. So that's the unique feature that we see reflected here in the operating statement this year. And the upshot of all that really is if we skip down to the number near the bottom of the page for unallocated operating surplus or deficit, this number, which is $337,449,200, that's not a random number by chance. That exactly equals the figure that is referenced in Act 78, Section C100, which directs the first $337,449,200 to be carried forward to fiscal 24. And that was a number that the FY24 budget is built around in the construct for FY24. So we had a fairly straightforward closeout, didn't run into any major problems. We did have to have some things covered back in the statement of legislative intent in June, which would have complicated things if we hadn't had clarification. But based on that process, we were able to execute according to the session law as enacted and come out with exactly the amount needed for next year. And there will be no general fund left that is not spoken for, so to speak. So any questions before I move off the general fund operating statement?
Committee, any questions? Okay, thank you. We'll keep going then.
Okay. Seeing none, I'll move on. I'll just add, I guess I didn't speak to the reserves at all. And we did, again, bring the budget stabilization reserve up to the statutory maximum with almost $20 million added there. The only other reserve change was a technical adjustment between the Human Services caseload reserve and the 2753. It's really a technical item that I wasn't planning to get into. I can answer any questions and follow up.
I guess if people want to get into that level of detail, we can do it offline.
Okay. So I'm going to turn now to page 3 of 4, which is the education fund summary. And I will probably be brief here. There's not a lot of significant difference since the May Ed Fund Outlook was prepared by JFO. The total revenue did come in 1.7 million higher versus the May General Fund Outlook. So slightly up there. And I guess within the, within the revenue items, sales and use tax did end up being down about 5 million versus the May outlook, although the other segments made up for that with the, especially the other category, but slightly up in purchase and use, meals and rooms and lottery as well. Within sales and use tax, although it was down 5 million versus the May outlook, at closeout, there was one segment of sales and use tax that was up, which is the cannabis revenue, a little over a million higher than was previously expected. But at 2.8 million versus the 1.7 we were expecting back in May, it's not a tremendous difference, but $1 million there. So that's a summary of the revenue. Of course, there's no changes within the appropriations section versus your May preview. I guess the only material difference between the May outlook and this statement here is if you look all the way down to the bottom line, the current year unreserved unallocated figure of 137 million is 32 million higher than the figure cited in the May outlook. And that is directly attributable to the fact that per Act 78 C112, 32 million, which you can see up in line 24B, was unreserved from the PCB reserve. So that will be available for deployment in FY24. So that's the Ed Fund outlook. And I'll pause if there are any questions there. Okay, so we'll move on to the T fund, and really pretty straightforward here. I don't think I have much to say other than that the revenue is 3.96 million lower than the January forecast, so a little bit off, but that can be that was made up by the reversions line to revert that same amount to end in balance while also providing the full 5% stabilization reserve. So that's the T fund. I guess not much to see here. And if there are no questions, I'll keep moving. I know you've got a packed agenda.
Questions on that?
Okay, so Exhibit A2 is the unencumbered balance transfers report, and we are typically required to provide this report pursuant to Section D 101B2 each year, and this is the final amounts transferred from the funds listed here. I've already, I think, spoken to the construct this year and the fact that we were only transferring from these funds to the general fund the amounts required to close in balance. So that's what happened on the first page of A2. On the second page of A2, we're spelling out the specific amounts that were transferred from those funds to the cash fund, the second sub-account of the cash fund. That's the part that's unique and different this year, that we're also reporting these transfers. I think I've already spoken to those and we understand the construct, and these are the numbers to the penny. So that's Exhibit A2, fairly straightforward. And if there are no questions, I'll keep moving through.
Don't see questions.
Okay, so our final report to bring to you today is Exhibit A3, and this is the report required pursuant to Section 7B of Act 81 of 2023, which is of course the act that was passed during the special section. And so here we're required to report on the balance appropriated to the Agency of Human Services for the General Assistance Emergency Transition Program. And this is the number there, the 25.395 million, which ends up being available, of 23 million of that coming from those special fund unobligated balance transfers, and there was already a couple million unallocated in that sub-account of the cash fund. Exactly. So that's what Secretary Samuelson will have to work with when she takes the podium here.
That's fortunate. When we did Act 81, the first place we were looking for was actually to do an additional contingent appropriation. And so we knew that we thought revenues would be there to support that last contingent appropriation. We had 21.5 in the budget, just to give a refresher here. And so this is really good relative to what the obligations are for the flood. So it's nice to know that this sub-account can provide the adequate funding for Act 81. So thank you. Anything else? Yes.
Sorry, just a quick question. This is in addition to the money that was appropriated for the general assistance housing and hotel voucher.
If you're referring to that 10 million,
The 26 million.
28. It was a total, because you did 7.5 in the base.
Right.
And the balance 18 was
Right, one
four.
time.
Yes. So this is all in addition.
it's in addition to that, Jim, as well, in addition to the C-123 section of Act 178, of Act 78 rather, which was 10 million. And so this is in addition to that. And I'll add, without speaking too much on behalf of AHS, but this figure really falls right in the range between low and high of the estimates they were making of what would be required additional to to fully execute the executive order and the provisions of Act 81. So we are, it will remain to be seen if additional adjustment is required in BAA, but I think it's safe to say sort of the pressure and urgency is off right now. I'll just add there was going to be an additional report required at this meeting by AHS on the status of their closeout and carry forward funds available to fund this purpose. And really based on the way this number came in, that was removed from the agenda because that kind of rushed carry forward process isn't required. And in fact, AHS will be reporting their carry forward balances, which just like all other departments and agencies are due finance and management tomorrow, actually. And we'll be going over those plans the next couple of weeks. And that's really our first step moving towards, BAA development. But no fire, I guess the good news is no fire drill there. And we'll be able to work out any additional needs from their carry forward. But based on this 25.3 million, things are in pretty good shape for that emergency need.
Yes, Representative.
Thank you. I guess I just wanted to, I appreciate that reference to the AHS closeout. I just want to, highlight that we don't know yet, because we haven't seen a full budget of what's needed, whether this 25 million in addition to what we have in the budget is actually sufficient. So I just wanted to put that on the record.
That's completely appropriate to have on the record. And as stated before, I guess the good news here is this is cash in the bank now and available, and we'll probably have time to work things out in BAA and not in a fire drill situation, but we'll be able to see how things are going. And this will be a big part of our, BAA development. Of course, flood concerns will also probably be a part of that too.
Thank you.
So we will be, I'm sure, revisiting this in the BAA process. Other questions? Then thank you, Marty, for your presentation and the documents.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
And so we're going to move on to the Medicaid year-end report, and Nolan Langwell is here to do that from Joint Fiscal.
Morning.
Morning.
For the record, Noel Langwell, the Joint Fiscal Office. You really are very far away.
I know.
I'm going to make some comment about Putin.
Good choice. So we should look at B1. Is that
Yes.
correct document for everyone?
Yeah. So I'm just going to sort of highlight some various pieces of this. Yes, you should all have the report. By statute, Joint Fiscal and Administration are required to report on the most recent end-year Medicaid and Medicaid-related programs to the E-Board, which this is not, but this is a preview of what we'll be giving to the E-Board. We include caseload, expenditure information, and other information that we sort of want to flag for you in the budget. Data in this report represent the most current information we have for the end year fiscal year 23 that's provided to us to date. And when new information comes forward, we can update it as it goes forward. But this is really just going to highlight just some of the key points. The impact of the COVID-19 public health emergency continues to reverberate through the healthcare system, and it will probably have effects for the years to come. Overall, 23 Medicaid and Medicaid-related expenditures total $2.17 billion. This was 2.3% or $52 million below what we had budgeted in BAA, but yet still 9% increase in spending over fiscal year 22. Global commitment and overall program administration were down, while the state-only pharmacy and DISH payments were up. Particularly with DISH, the state doubled its DISH this year. Normally DISH is 22.7 million. There's a cap on it, but there's a cap, and this year we went to the cap. And the cap is 46.4 million. And this was to help stabilize hospital providers as was allowed under Act 83 of 22, which was the budget adjustment. Medicaid continuous enrollment. We often refer to this as the suspension of redetermination. The feds call it Medicaid continuous enrollment. As you know, this was passed at the beginning of the pandemic. This ended on March 31st as part of the Federal Consolidation Appropriation Act of 2023. Bless you. So the process of redetermining eligibility in Vermont began in April and is expected to take about 12 to 14 months. The non-disabled adult eligibility categories were the ones that were most impacted during this Medicaid period, Normally, these categories experienced a turn on and off the program, that they just had more people coming on and nobody coming off. So there was a significant increase in those particular. Conversely, though, the number of people that were receiving Vermont premium assistance saw decreases in the same period. So we anticipate that as this federal policy, they're calling it the unwind, we anticipate that as this moves forward, we should see a flip-flop where we'll see more of a leveling out of the non-disabled folks, but seeing an increase again in those receiving Vermont premium assistance. Related to this, as you know, we've been getting a 6.2% additional FMAP since 2020. Also part of this Federal Consolidation Appropriation Act, this enhanced FMAP has begun to wind down. On April 1st, it decreased from 6.2% to 5%, and then again to 2.5% on July 1. It will decrease again on October 1st to 1.5%. And then at the end of the calendar year, it will cease to exist altogether. Between fiscal year 2020 and 2023, this enhanced FMAP resulted in over $300 million in general fund savings to the state. Looking ahead, some other things I just want to flag. ARPA provided the states with a 10% enhanced match for 1 year. This was the period April 21 to March 2022 on home and community-based services. Vermont had $71.8 million in savings in this period. This money can be matched to almost $162 million gross, and it can be spent over a multi-year period on home and community-based services as per a federally approved plan. Under this plan, fiscal year 22 budget included a 3% rate increase for several home and community-based services. This will be funded over 3 years. However, in fiscal year 25, there will be a need to backfill these as the rate increases become part of the base. That's estimated to cost about $17 million gross or $7 million state. FFIS has projected a 15.9% increase in clawback beginning in calendar year 24, which could have a general fund pressure of between $3.5 and $6.8 million in fiscal year 24, as well as representative based pressure going forward. The IMD phase down, which was part of the new global commitment waiver last year, is estimated to be an additional $2.1 million pressure in 24 and a $6.4 million pressure in fiscal year 25. Also, under the guise of continuous enrollment, there's a new provision as part of the same federal consolidation appropriations, which is basically a continuous enrollment for children. It required all states to have a 12-month continuous eligibility policy for all the kids who were on Medicaid and CHIP as of January 1, 2024. This will have some fiscal impact, but it has not yet been determined what that would be. With prescription drugs, every year there tends to be a new drug that comes onto the market that costs a lot of money. It's one that AHS has been paying very close attention to. And then finally, the floods. The floods may or may not have an impact. We do not know what the short-term or long-term effect would be on this, on caseload or expenditures, and we'll find out, but we'll definitely keep an eye on it. That's the highlights of the Medicaid year.
A lot of moving pieces there in terms of future budgetary impact.
Yeah.
Questions? Yes. Can you tell me a little bit more about the clawback?
Yes. So clawback was tied to Medicare Part D. And essentially what it was this, and I'll let Senator Kitchell fill in the blanks where I flaw on it, but essentially when they came up with Medicare Part D 15 years ago, whatever, it was supposed to help states. It was new money to states, and so the clawback is a way for the federal government to sort of accrue some of the money it costs the federal government to provide the service to states. Now, we were already doing, we already had a prescription drug program, so it wasn't great for us. But essentially, it's the federal government trying to help pay for this program. And it sort of will go on in perpetuity.
Still a fairly significant increase, almost 16%.
It is, very much so.
Yes, reference comparison.
Nolan, do we have, and it's maybe more appropriate for AHS, but do we have any update on how the determinations are going?
I would defer to AHS on that. Can I phone a friend?
For the record, Jenny Center, Secretary, Agency of Human Services, they are going as planned. Though with the flood, they have paused redeterminations for those who have been impacted or affected. So they are going as planned.
We know if they're actually showing a decrease in total enrollment, or is it they're all being redetermined as is? I mean, do we?
So let me reframe the question, make sure that I understand it. Have we seen a reduction in the total enrollment? Not more than expected. There is a dashboard. Why don't I send you a link, and that will give you the detailed information.
Thank you.
I think nationwide, the experience is people are not returning. They're having to go through a redetermination process. They're sent the forms and they're just, and it could be their circumstances change, they have insurance. Because how long has it been since we've suspended 3 years? It's a long period of time in a very dynamic population. So, other questions? Thank you, Nolan. And this is very good when you have a minute to go through this. It helps. Medicaid is such a big program, actually, and so many moving pieces. We have a report called the 52 Points of Light. And so we track Medicaid expenditures weekly, simply to make sure how things are going. So it's good that we closed out the year on a positive note, because there was some concern that might not be the case. So that's some good news to go with a whole lot of not so good news. All right, so now we're moving on to the state colleges and the sale of radio licenses. And we have Patricia Turley here, General Counsel from Vermont State Colleges, and who's that? So who's Chancellor State College, and Catherine we have the whole triumvirate here. So we are being asked to address a situation that we changed the statute and no longer required legislative approval for the sale, but we are actually being asked to authorize sales that occurred prior to that change in the statutory language. The sales have actually been transacted, and so this is an action on the part of the legislature to validate and to make sort of official that legislative obligation to approve. So that's kind of the context of why we have state colleges here today, and I don't know who's going to present the background. All right. Okay. All right. So if you want to put yourself on the record, and we'll take it from here.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm Patty Turley. I'm the General Counsel for Vermont State Colleges, and yes, with me is Sophie Zadetny and Catherine Levasseur. We are here today seeking retroactive approval of the divestment of 2 campus radio station licenses under the Vermont Telecommunications Act. The VTA was enacted in June of 2007 and repealed last month. Campus radio stations in the Vermont State Colleges system are primarily run by students. With one exception, the Vermont State Colleges campuses have had difficulty recently holding student interest in traditional broadcasting. Students are more interested in streaming content over the internet. Castleton was the first campus to experience this decline, and now Linden and Johnson have as well. The radio station associated with the Randolph campus is still holding strong in terms of interest and participation. The declining interest of students made it more difficult to meet FCC requirements, which include regular reports on activity, content, and the like. Following several years of compliance challenges and associated expenses, Castleton began considering whether it wanted to continue to hold its license. In 2017, we consulted with our FCC counsel, who described these campus radio station licenses as having limited value due to the restrictions on non-commercial educational stations. These are not your typical commercial broadcast stations. A broker would be required if we sold the license. In late 2018, Castleton determined the most expedient route was to relinquish the license, to turn it back over to the FCC. Following public meetings of our a certain committee of our Board of Trustees, as well as then the Board of Trustees themselves, the license was returned to the FCC, which also required public postings of that action. So we did not sell the Castleton license, we turned it back over to the FCC. More recently, Northern Vermont University made a similar decision, and the board initially voted not to renew the FCC licenses for Johnson and Linden. After learning of the decision through FCC filings, we were approached by two different parties with interest in one or both licenses. Accordingly, we did a slightly late but still effective renewal of those licenses with the FCC and explored their sale or transfer. Vermont Public Radio, now known as Vermont Public, offered $80,000 for the Linden license alone, and we entered into a sales agreement. In accordance with the FCC requirements, notice of the sale was published through the FCC public files, including a period of time for public impact statements. Another entity, also a Vermont nonprofit, remains interested in the Johnson license, which has a lesser value because it has a much smaller transmission area. We were unaware of the law, of the VTA's requirement that we seek legislative approval. We made these decisions using the best information available to us. We were guided by experienced FCC counsel. FCC counsel work in a federal regulatory, so that they were not aware of this law as well. And we seek your approval to cure this deficiency in our actions. And I'm sure you have some questions.
Committee, questions? Yes.
I do have a question, not so much about the disposition of the licenses or the retroactive curing, because that seems to be relatively straightforward, but in the thinking about the unified campus, I understand that originally there were separate radio stations. Is there a thought going forward as we transition to streaming about a kind of unified vision for how the university is going to work, or will it wind up being separate streaming operations in the way that we had separate, broadcast operations?
At this point, the student government associations are really trying to think through all the different student activities and what that will look like. So I would say that's still a work in progress on those things. A lot of, obviously, all the behind the scenes registration systems, all that stuff is in place for the single university. But the student government associations themselves, the students will be working a lot of those things out, like student fees, student activities. So I would expect that they will be thinking through on that as well. But there will be more opportunities for cross-campus collaboration on things like this. Again, if there are students at Castleton, Linden, or Johnson that are interested in participating in a traditional campus radio station, they'll have that opportunity through the Randolph campus.
If you just want to do something about it.
Oh, this is Sophie Zadatny, Chancellor for the Vermont State College System. Apologize.
And then just to make sure I understand where we're at now. So only the VTC campus has a broadcast operation.
So, no, that's not quite correct. The Johnson license, we renewed the Johnson license because there was interest in one or both, the Linden and Johnson, Northern Vermont University.
But the plan is to sell the Johnson.
The plan is to likely sell the Johnson license.
Okay.
Yes.
And because that statute's not been repealed, that can be done without any action on our part. Representative Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So since these processes needed to be public and since we normally when the colleges undertake something that they've decided to divest themselves of, we get a lot of comments here in the legislature. Now, I didn't happen to receive any about this. I'm just wondering, during the public comment process, were there any public comments regarding the action?
I did not look back at the Castleton action. That was three or 4 years ago now. The Linden license, which was required to be posted for that public comment, did not receive public comment.
Other questions? So this, as you can, and it's an action item, so we need to take official action, and I guess,
I think I'm going to do that.
I think we are about to get a motion.
I move to retroactively approve the disposition of WWLR Linden and WIUV Castleton radio licenses previously required by 30 VSA 8063.
Second that.
Second, all right, so we have a motion made and seconded to approve retroactively the sale of the radio licenses as presented. Unless there's further discussion, I'll call for a vote. All those in
I have a
favor?
question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Senator Sears.
Actually, it's a comment. I've read the memo from Maria Royale. I'm not sure we have, I don't know the history of the 2023. I missed it, I guess, whenever we did that. But I'm not sure we have the authority to approve this. I would really like to have legislative counsel.
If you look at the attachment C from Legislative Counsel from Maria Royale, at the last paragraph, in light of these circumstances, a joint fiscal committee has the authority to retroactively approve all 5 contracts and thereby cure the procedural defects. So
I don't understand where we got that power.
well, I don't think we have Maria here. Is she here? Oh, Jen's here. We have Jen Carby here from Legislative Counsel, perhaps.
That might
Are
help.
you
I
prepared to
just
speak
want
to but she's not prepared to speak to this opinion that was prepared by Maria Royale.
if we took away the legislative role in 2023, I'm not sure we have the power to retroactively approve all 5. That's what I'm trying to understand. I just want to make sure that we're doing something that isn't going to.
We're exercising the power that we had before we repealed that statute.
Well, and also, I don't think we took away our power. We took away the requirement that we be notified.
But it said the legislature or the fiscal committee. Okay.
So,
All right. Well.
So we did obviously have Ledge Counsel take a look at the request and what our role would be to cure the error here. And so it's a good question because it's kind of it's an unusual circumstance. No question about that, Senator Sears. Other comments? Otherwise, I was in the midst of are about to call the roll. And so we are going to have to do this.
Ready?
So unless there's further discussion, I'm going to have the clerk call the roll.
Senator Baruch.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Harrison, yes. Representative Lanford.
Yes.
Representative Schy,
Yes.
Senator Sears.
No.
No? I'm sorry, Senator Sears?
Oh,
Okay, sorry. Senator Westman,
Yes.
Representative Wood,
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser,
Yes.
Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Madam Chair?
Yeah, but my question is, can we vote remotely? That's.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
think so.
So.
yeah.
I thought we changed it in the
It
spring.
used to be the House rules, and
I believe
On
we
joint-
made a provision, I'm looking for Jen, but I believe you
That
made a
was the
provision
resolution we
for,
passed.
three, you could, up to joint meetings, you could have up to three people, that counts as a quorum, that counts as a vote for up to 3 meetings.
Through this, the joint correction, Justice Oversight Committee had to meet remotely because the State House was closed right after the flood. And we had John Bloomer look at that, and it is allowed for remote
Did that during
voting
the
under
veto session.
ARH 6.
all right. So I think everybody's saying we did actually give ourselves the authority to to vote remotely. So I think with that, then we have a vote of 9-1 to retroactively approve the sale. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now you can see we've got the next hour, and we're going to be talking about housing update. And this is certainly something that we spent a lot of time, Act 81, and the Joint Fiscal Committee was given the charge of oversight in terms of how we are implementing the transition from a hotel program that was set up as part of the pandemic. And so I think we were going to have everyone come up at the same time and sort of coordinate their presentation to us. We have, but if we want to do it separately, I don't know. There was some discussion about coming as a group, but as you can see on the agenda, we have the first item is the transitioning, and this is from AHS and DCF. So why don't we start with Secretary Samuelson and Commissioner Winters. Well,
Deputy Commissioner Gray.
yeah, I was going to say over there, and I have my reading glasses on, and I thought that gentleman was Chris, but it's not. So my apologies. Okay, so if you want to introduce yourselves through the record, please.
Jenny Samuelson, the Secretary for the Agency of Human Services. I have here with me today Deputy Commissioner Miranda Gray and the Director of the Office of Economic Opportunity, Sarah Phillips. So, thank you for having us. I know that we've got a tight agenda with only 20 minutes. We have a lot of data to go through this morning. We're going to try to go through it relatively quickly, and I hope that we can get through it and then take questions at your discretion, Madam Chair, so that we can make sure to meet the time goals.
Okay, and we have two documents from you, D and D1, I believe, in our package.
D is the.
Oh, D is just to remind us all.
The language
To help us see how you are doing relative to providing this kind of data. So that's right. So D1 is the document that you've submitted.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So we'll walk through the data that you have in front of you in D1. As we all may remember, the cohort that we are going to be talking about today are those who continue in the 630 cohort for the historic pandemic era housing program. On June 30th, what we saw was a population of 1,250 households currently in the program. That group of households will be static and will continue. That will be the group that we will be using and bearing bearing back in mind throughout the next few months of where we started and where we're going. We, at this point in time, now that we've moved forward by a month, we now have 1,025 households currently remaining in the program, with 174 households who've transitioned out, and I'll go through in a second where they have transitioned to. Our average nightly rate has come down slightly to $140 per night. It's important to note that the way that we're going about this are individual negotiations with hotels. This is an average. And so what you will see is that as we go through this over time, this will come down slowly again, because it's individual negotiations with each of the hotels.
Just remind me, it was 146 before, or what was the average before?
Yeah, 146.
Yeah.
So it doesn't change too much.
It's only come down slightly. So moving forward to look at and understand the households that we have currently in the program, the next slide that you have identifies where in the state by district that these households are. I will note that over 80% of the households are in 5 primary areas of the state, including the central Vermont area, Bennington County, the Brattleboro area, Burlington or Chittenden County, and Rutland County. So that's one under 1,000 are in those 5 areas, with encompassing more than 80%. And you will see that trend carry forward as we go through the next few slides. And also you'll see us focusing a significant amount of resources and efforts there. The next slide represents taking a look at the population based on the household size in the current hotel program, the number of bedrooms or units that we need to bring online, and by what size. I think that this really points out that really what we're looking at is a units challenge and problem as we try to bring on the number of units. Many of you may remember that for many who were in the hotels before, they even had housing vouchers, but there weren't units for them to transition to. The point of this slide, though, is to really look at what type of units. And unlike the past, we've often contemplated, because most of our housing programs have been for families and for vulnerable populations, what you see here is the number of the highest percentage of households that are in this program really are looking at single bedrooms or single room occupancy type of units. Moving forward, one of the things that we will continue to...
Madam Secretary, you've got 1 bedroom or SRO and then 1 bedroom. What distinguishes those 2 columns in terms of?
Yeah, so the first column is primarily those that are single person households, and the second may be a 2-person household that really does need a bedroom.
Just wanted to.
And the asterisks?
Yes. Next to 10.
Yep. The asterisk next to 10 is there's a single household in there that will potentially need a larger than a 3-bedroom unit. Thank you for it.
Can I ask one quick?
Yes.
Do you know how many of this 1,250 have vouchers? How many of these people have vouchers?
I'm going to have to, Deputy Fisher, right?
I don't know that number off the top of my head, but I can look to see if that is something that we have, or if we will be able to understand, because all housing vouchers don't necessarily come through the state.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you. I'm wondering if there's a built-in assumption here that the people are in the counties that where they're being housed now in the motel program. That's where they would normally live. So I'm looking at Addison County, where I'm from, which only has 9, and I think that's because we don't have very many options available. And I'm thinking that those people may have moved to Chittenden and Rutland counties, and yet we may not be building the amount that we need. So I don't know what you're doing, if you can speak to how you're dealing with that issue.
So the way that we're dealing with that issue is we're beginning to ask folks in their eligibility determination where they would like to go back to. That is not fully built in here, but this is really an opportunity for us to have a rough idea of where the units are and how many individuals we need. That said, I want to make sure that we're all aware that there are some individuals who have moved out of their county, but it's not the vast majority. And that's why we wanted to present this as a rough idea. The vast majority were able to stay in the communities where they're from. But it's a great question. Thank you.
Senator Westman.
So how many of these, because in my county, the units that were available June 30th are gone. So how many of these are affected by the flood? Because, for example, the motels that were housing people before aren't there anymore.
So I can pull up the information on the hotels. There were a small number of hotels that were impacted by the floods. We're currently looking at and assessing what that means for the populations, and that work is ongoing.
At some point, when we get through this presentation, I want to hear where we're going with that population, because we ended up with a fair number of people in shelters, and
Where they've been rehoused.
Yeah.
Or,
where are they? Well, and the other problem is that there isn't the housing for them, and what as we've tried to get them people to work with through Capstone, the caseload at Capstone is so great that before this started, there was over 70 households that they were helping for. And now some of the counselors are pushing 90 to 100. So for me, there's a piece of crisis that goes well beyond all of this.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I want to make sure that we all understand that the flood has a significant impact, particularly in the central Vermont region, on the housing units that we have. And I can walk through a little bit of what we're doing on that.
But we're going to be dealing with floods a little later.
Exactly. And that's what I was going to point out. There were 30, what Senator Westman is speaking to is that there were 32 individuals who are in the hotels who had to temporarily leave. Some of them have been able to return to their current hotels, but Miranda.
Yeah, for the record, Miranda Gray, Deputy Commissioner for the Economic Services Division. We did have 4 motels that had received damage, and we have been able to, one of the hotels, people didn't need to leave, but the other 3, we were able to rehouse those individuals at different motels.
Thank you. Other questions? Otherwise, we'll keep going through. I just want to say this is a really wonderful presentation of the data. Very easy to read, not a lot of narrative. So I just want to acknowledge the work, because when we first started out, we were it was sort of a blank slate in terms of the data, the profile, the needs. So this is, I just feel that this is a very succinct and easy way of getting information to us.
Just quickly, it's good to see the trend starting to reverse itself. However, do we know, when you go from 1,250 to, just over 1,000, do we know what happened to those people? Did they actually succeed in finding housing?
That's a couple slides up.
Yeah.
So I think as we go through, I think some of the questions. Good, I'm glad you were listening very closely. I appreciate that. There are a couple slides up that I think will answer some of our questions. So if we go through some of the data, that will allow us to then get to questions I think are going to be comprehensive.
I just want to add, I appreciate that the folks who are in this particular cohort are moving into new housing. I don't know if I would characterize it as the trend is reversing itself, given that we still have a lot more people coming into homelessness, and some of them staying in the motel, some of them not under different eligibility criteria. So I'm very happy for the work that's happening here. And I know that you're doing a lot of other work and a lot of other people are experiencing hardship that are not on this PowerPoint.
Right. Yeah. And I want to acknowledge that. And what you will see is the last slide, which is in the appendix, will help to highlight and identify that this is only one small cohort of those individuals who are experiencing homelessness. Okay, so moving forward, but directly going back to this, to those who are currently in the program, the next slide outlines the eligibility criteria by age, disability, and domestic violence, families with children, health code violations, natural disasters, and pregnancies that are in this cohort. And I want to acknowledge that's not the whole population of those experiencing homelessness at this point. I will say that we get a lot of questions around the disability category. That is a broad range from individuals who are experiencing mental health, chronic illness, chronic conditions, physical disabilities. And within each of those categories, it's a broad range of ability. So it's worth pointing out that is a pretty diverse category of individuals. Moving forward to get to your question.
I have a question on this, two questions on this slide. Just want to clarify that some people are double counted for good reason here.
Double?
Like someone might be, have a family and have SSI, for example.
Okay, so they're going to fall under the SSI category first. They're not double counted.
Oh, you're not double counted at all?
No, it's still the 1025.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so they are not double counted. So in this case, they are falling under the SSI, SSDI category first, and then under the other categories.
And is it in the order that you would pick to put someone in?
It's, however, I would say is the easiest for the individual to be able to determine that they have eligibility for the program. So disability, because it is based on receipt of Social Security, is very easy for us to be able to determine that for the individual. Whereas something, same with having children, that's a fairly simple thing. But an eviction is harder because there's paperwork that you need to be able to obtain from your past to be able to share with economic services. Okay.
And then I understand that if you divide this by county, we would wind up with numbers so small, probably you shouldn't be sharing it with us. Do you see a real range from county to county and how these numbers shake out? I remember at some point we had sort of a supposition, I don't even know if I'd call it an assumption, that some regions might have much higher folks with disability levels or much higher families with children.
We do have that, and I think, yes, I want to say that we do have that based upon if you looked at the previous where we have our districts, that slide.
Yeah.
Yes, you would see the range.
Is the mix different though? Of the
prevalence of the difference
of eligibility criteria
by district?
Yeah,
I don't think so.
we can, yeah, it doesn't tend to change or shift significantly. I think where you might be able to conceptualize that is in the units data, and you don't see a vast variety of different issues. Okay.
We're going to keep going very quickly.
Yep. We've got a very succinct amount of time.
We've got a lot more slides and we've got minutes, so let's keep going.
So the next slide gives you the reasons for exiting the program. Some of them have transitioned to apartments, 34. They've exited related to misconduct. They've been housed in something other than an apartment, like a family member or other housing opportunity. We've had a small number move out of state. And then we get a lot of questions about non-renewal. Not every month, every 28 days, an individual needs to renew. In that case, there's a significant amount of outreach that Economic Services does by phone, in person often, and also by correspondence, by mail. And these are the individuals who ESD has not been able to make contact with. You may see that number go down because as individuals lose their benefits, that sometimes entices them to reach out to the state. And so we are doing everything we can to make sure that they don't lose eligibility just because they didn't contact us.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
If I could just quickly ask about misconduct. That was one area where people showed concern when we had our Senate debate. It's a relatively modest number.
Yes.
But the worry was that misconduct would be defined by motel owners without checks on their ability to exit people. Any thoughts on how that's going?
It's going relatively well, and the next submission of the emergency rule will have that laid out in more detail.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. Moving on, as folks may remember, the Agency of Human Services began screening individuals for their risks and needs back in November. It's not the same cohort. It's a constantly evolving cohort. We are now digging in with this cohort specifically. I do want to note that this will give us information on the types of supports they need, but really it is a unit that they need more than anything else. It is not, and it's that type of, the types of supports will assist us in both helping them find a unit that is appropriate and in helping them keep a unit. But it really is a unit issue. And again, you see this, we've got about 755 individuals and households screened, and about 437 have moved forward. We are shoring up the Agency of Human Services resources here. We have Rescue Inc., who just began going out so that we can rapidly increase the screening now that we have a discrete population that's not ever evolving.
I wanted to correct your comment. Obviously, it's housing, but we know with many populations and with such a percentage of people with disabilities here, SSI or Social Security, it's housing combined. And we have the report from the HCB that is talking about the resources that are necessary to support and preserve the housing once it's secured. So yes, you've got to have the unit, but you've also got to have the services there so that you're not ending up with future evictions, or the people that have fairly complex needs get the support they need. So interplay is so essential that with the housing first experience that we've had.
Yeah, we absolutely agree. And that's why programs like Pathways and other programs that really combine services and housing together are essential. Many of those programs are having a hard time expanding their reach because of the lack of actual units. Okay, moving
I have a
forward.
question.
Yes, Senator Sears.
I'm trying to understand what that means. Households with a shared care plan, you screened 119 in Barry, and 109 of them have a shared health plan, so only 9 of them don't. However, in Bennington, you screened 96 households, only 50 of them have a shared plan, and it goes on. Similarly, in the other 3 major districts, Burlington, Rutland, and Brattleboro. Why are those so much lower than Barry? Is it a lack of staff? Is it a lack of what is the reason for that?
So I think we'll look to the team, but we see in some of these areas have been a lot more churn in the population. We do see some staffing related issues. It's a process, though. It's a matter of ensuring that we're going in, we screen individuals, and then they meet on an ongoing basis with a care manager. And it takes some time to get from the screening phase to the phase of having a shared care plan. And again, in some areas it's churn, where we've seen a lot more folks coming in and out of the program, and that means we've started plans, moved folks on. In other areas, we may have had less staff. And in some areas, it's also engagement of the client. This really has to be a client focus. So we can dig into specific areas, Senator Sears, with you, but those are some of the interplays that we see for getting from screening to shared care plans.
Well,
It would be helpful. It would be helpful to me and perhaps others who represent some of those areas to hear more detail at a later date.
We're going to be getting monthly reports, so we can really see that trend.
I'd like to know more about why the disparity, though. This tells me the number with a shared care plan, which seems good, but I don't understand why there's only 10 of the households screened in Barry that don't have a shared plan, and 46 don't have a shared plan in Bennington. I don't understand that. Same with, and it's even worse in Rutland and Burlington in terms of percentage without a shared plan.
So maybe we could just get a follow-up.
Yeah, we'll get a follow-up summary to you on that.
And focusing on those areas where that disparity is so significant. Other comments, Senator Sears?
That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to have to move along pretty quickly here.
So I think we've actually touched on the next slide in our conversation that we've had. So we'll keep moving on to the data. One of the elements that the legislature was really interested in is understanding for the small proportion of the clients who need residential care, what's the capacity in the residential care system? You see that outlined in slide number 9. In addition to that, we are working with the Vermont Healthcare Association to survey long-term care residential care facilities and to assess the availability and barriers for their expansion for the needed population. That report will be back to us in September, and so we can bring that subsequently forward. Moving on, there were questions about the security deposits, and I'll remind the committee that between summer of 2022 and March of 2023, the program fundamentally changed when we used ERAP resources to a more rental relationship. And so during that time period, individuals who came into the program had a direct lease type relationship with the hotels, and the state paid security deposits. This will be a one-time report out because this information will not change. But you see the total number of people and the funds that went out. If they stayed in the program less than 4 months, the state reclaimed those security deposits when they left the program. And then the rest of the security deposits were paid out in a relationship between the hotel and the individuals in March of 2023.
Yes. I noticed, I didn't see in slide 9, there's residential capacity for sort of specialized services, but I didn't see the total number of beds available for just regular emergency housing anywhere. Is that later in the presentation?
For emergency shelter beds? No, it's not, and I can follow up with the exact number.
Thanks. And I know that changes every day, point in time, but thank you.
I know we're pressed for time, but on security deposits, at the very bottom, it says all deposits should have been returned to clients with no room damages. The state does not have data on what was returned versus held. So that 5 million number there should have been returned, but we don't have any idea about how much was.
It was how much was returned to the clients. It was a relationship between the clients and the hotels.
Understood, but it was state money.
It was state money. We do not have any information on the amount of that was returned. We do know that the Attorney General's office and others, Attorney General's office and Vermont Legal Aid have been working with clients who feel like they did not receive their security deposits back, and or hotels who may not have administered the program appropriately.
I'm just wondering why can't the state require that the motel owners report that data? The state gave the security deposit.
Correct. I think at this point it would be asking motels to go back to determine, and don't know that they would be able
Probably
to.
getting into a legal
Yes.
question. Why do we put that
And we'll
on our
we'll follow up.
explanation list in terms of, and I think we were using ERAP, so these were federal.
We were using ERAP. These were federal dollars administered under the
And they
agency
may go to the beneficiary, not, so I don't know, but this is something legally I think we'll have to.
Doug, do you have any comment?
I can come help. Douglas Farnham, Deputy Secretary for the Agency of Administration. So yes, the ERAP program, those 9 months while it was operating in that manner, the state didn't have a formal role, a legal role in the relationship between the renter. So we were paying the security deposit on behalf of the renter, but that didn't give us any legal rights to impose any conditions. The feds actually said you cannot impose additional conditions on landlords beyond some eviction prevention measures that they allowed in ERAP. So the state had very limited capability because of the federal restrictions on the program.
Yeah, we could not legally require the hotels to report it back.
I just want to note the craziness of pouring millions of dollars into a program, but neither the feds nor the state having any reporting on how that gets ultimately dispersed.
Yeah. I can understand you're being confounded by the federal regulations and policies. So, but again, we did look into this several times. And we were not able to legally require the hotels to report this back.
So the rest is, let's go through it very quickly. And then I'm going to have to shrink probably VHCB a little bit, but obviously a lot of the oversight is directed toward the agencies. So we'll, if we can finish up in 5 minutes. And
And we can take even less, that we have received a lot of questions related to how we engage communities and are resourcing the program. We don't have to go through the rest of the slides. It can be there for your, and we can take questions offline. There are 2 key things that the agency did. One is we submitted an RFP asking for emergency shelter staff and services that was issued in May, returned in June. You will note from the timeline that that was prior to the period in which we created this transition period for the current program until April of next year. So what we're using that RFP to do is to staff the screening and case management to shore up the AHS staff that are currently doing that. And then in addition to that, filling gaps in the community shelters. The rest of the slides, which again, we can, are really there because we've gotten questions about it, are around the process where we submitted letters of intent. I want to note that when we did the letters of intent, we requested the letters of intent from communities. There were many other things that we continue to do in terms of engaging with our providers through the Office of Economic Opportunity, through our usual processes in state government, and those continue to go. This was a supplemental activity where we knew at that moment that we were going to have a major transition that was going to impact communities, and we wanted to engage communities and providers in helping to identify solutions, knowing that each community was very different. We received letters of request, of more than 50 of them from across the state. There was a vast range from people expressing an interest in just assisting to really solid proposals. Because it wasn't an RFP, it really was a way to generate ideas. Some of those were really viable and projects that have moved forward through the HOP program, and others were just communities expressing support. We can provide more information on those at a later period of time, but you've got some of the general information there. The other thing that you'll notice in the slides is we've received questions about whether the HOP grants went out this year. They absolutely did. They went out on time, and they included many of the items that communities put forward. So I'm going to pause there. I know that we're out of time for today, but we're happy to bring back more information on the letters of opportunity in the future.
Yeah.
Thank you for all of this, and as the chair said, this is like very comprehensive and helpful and clear to read, and I appreciate all of that. I noticed that there are 2 things we asked for in the legislation around sort of an outlook into the future and a projected timeline for transitioning households. I know we're early in this project, and I know that the more we do for planning now, the better off households will be as we move along. So I'm wondering about your plans for offering that to us next time.
I appreciate you bringing that up. What I will say is 2 things. It's early in the process, and the flood has significantly impacted, and I know that the agency and administration will go through that, has significantly impacted those plans. So we will continue to work on that and bring it forward at a future meeting.
Yep. Other comments or questions? Thank you. And we look forward to the next report, which would be monthly, so we can see how the trends go. And really, we have 2 things. We have this fixed population here, and then we've got the other populations that are in homelessness and have shelter needs. So
it's helpful to look at that very last chart to see that the other population right now, at least in the program, is quite small.
Yeah. So, is that good news, Representative Wood?
Yes, from my perspective.
I would think so. Thank you. So now we're going to move on to BHCB, and we have Paula Major here. Gus Seelig was not available, so He has asked Polly to give us the update on behalf of VHCB. So welcome, Paul.
Good morning. For the record, Polly Major. I'm the Director of Policy for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And we submitted to this committee a report of the board's activities over the last month to operationalize the requirements that are in Act 81. I know we are limited for time, so I'm going to let most of this stand in the report that we submitted, but did want to highlight some sections of that report for discussion with the committee or questions. The Act 81 asks us to provide monthly reports on the status of our initiatives to bring more units online and also shelter beds online. And while we're providing monthly numbers on those, I want to make sure that they're being read within the broader context of what Vermont is able to do in terms of bringing new affordable units online, which is going to be significant over the next 30 years. So since 2020,
did you say 3 or 30?
3, and hopefully 30 as well.
Great. I'm just glad you said 3. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
I wasn't sure either.
Sorry, continue.
But since 2020, the HCB has helped support the creation or funded the creation of 1,500 units. Those are units that will be coming on board over the next 3 years. So in this coming year, we're going to see about 45% of those online, but by the end of 2026, we'll see all of those units online, and we'll have more in the pipeline by that point. So while each month we're not seeing the magnitude of new units that we'd like to see, I do want to make sure that those monthly numbers are put in context of the ongoing work that is happening. Another point with the data that we provided is that construction timelines, as we've seen over the past few years, are hard to predict. And so there is going to be some fluctuation in the projections that we've provided to you, especially projects that are further out. They may encounter delays and likely will, especially as the impact of the flooding diverts resources to other construction projects. So there's going to be some fluctuation, and also as we provide monthly reports on the units that we anticipate came online during that month, those numbers aren't reconciled until the following month. So we're going to see some change there as well. But we'll try to be as accurate as possible, given all these variables. You also have asked us to report on the number of shelter beds that are coming online, and have also asked VHCB to invest $10 million in FY24 funds in bringing additional shelter beds online and investing into the shelter system. And as we've worked more with shelters across the state over the last several years, we've seen that a lot of their focus, rightly so, and specialty is in that service provision part of their work, and often they need support on the development and building side of these projects. So one thing we've done to help strengthen this pipeline is work with Evernorth, Vermont's housing syndicator, to help provide some of that professional development assistance to shelters that are bringing projects forward to help move them along and bring them to fruition. So we'll continue to learn how to support these projects, and we work very closely with OEO to bring new shelter projects in line. But that's just one thing that we're doing to try to increase shelter beds.
Yes. When you're looking at how to leverage both funding and that technical assistance, do you look at the data coming from AHS about where the greatest need is?
We work closely with the AHS on these projects, asking them to suggest shelter providers that want to develop have the ability to bring a new project. So yes, I think they're looking at that data and they're bringing those suggestions to us. And we're meeting weekly at this point to help collaborate on this.
I think I'm wondering about the edge between providers being ready, interested, having capacity to think about the next step,
and where the greatest need is. And I think we often tend to sort of give money and resources to those who ask for it or are ready for it, rather than perhaps where the greatest need is. And so I think those are two different things that I'd love us to pay attention to in the future.
That's something that we're certainly very aware of and trying to balance deploying the resources as quickly as possible to bring beds online, and also taking the time to develop projects in areas that have less of that development capacity. So very aware.
Thank you. I just want to sort of highlight Representative Kornheiser's comment and then ask one of my own. Looking in your list of projects, Rutland is a very high need area and very low project, area coming on board. So just highlighting what Representative Kornheiser had said in terms of areas of need. My real question was about on page 2 of your report, you addressed the $10 million around the manufactured home infill, and my question really is about in the second paragraph where you talked about 2 partners have already signaled their intent to seek funding to replace approximately 25 homes. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? I'm trying to figure out, is that like upgrading current individuals, or is that, could you just elaborate on that?
Sure, and I think that might be a little bit of a misnomer in their writing. I think that as we talk to our partners who operate, of the nonprofit development partners who operate parks, they have either had vacant lots that they can put a unit on, or they have a lot that is unutilized because the home on it is so deteriorated that it needs to be replaced in order to be habitable. And so often that is the case where we see both vacant and underutilized lots. Those underutilized lots are the ones that have an uninhabitable home on them.
And that's what's being replaced.
That would
with nobody living in it right now, I'm presuming. Okay, all right, that answers that question. And I was glad to see in Lamoille County the lawsuit being settled on the shelter. So
yes, that's very glad to see this forward.
Thank you.
One of the things that you have in here, and I don't know what you have for discussions going on, but that has to do with the feeling that with the increased population of renters that have exited homelessness, that the local housing entities really are struggling with the demands, staff demands, to work with those households so that they can preserve. Now, obviously, some individuals are coming, they're part of Housing First or their SASH or whatever. But there's a request for housing, I can't remember the title exactly. That would be to address the fact that you have such an increased percentage of renters that need to have support and to avoid eviction, or if in fact you have to undertake eviction proceedings, the staff resources that takes. So have you had discussions with the Agency of Human Services around that particular area of staffing resources?
So we're just starting to have those discussions.
And could you tell me the position again?
So I believe we termed it a housing retention specialist, but as we speak with our partners across the state, there's some variation in what they're looking for there. So it's kind of a blanket request, but the kind of context for this is Act 81 asks VHCB funded projects to increase the percentage of units set aside for households exiting homelessness from 15 to 30% in FY24. And as we look at that and interpret that language, if that were to be applied to new funded projects, it wouldn't be able to help in this effort to transition people out of the hotels, because those funded projects those units won't be online for the next several years. And furthermore, the new units coming online this year are bound by pre-existing legal agreements. So what we're hoping to do and asking this committee is to interpret this as a goal, asking our partners to have 30% of new units and units at turnover rented to people exiting homelessness, which is actually a greater number because that's pulling into this effort the whole affordable housing portfolio of the state. And as we've talked to our partners, asking them, is this something that they're able to do? The feedback we've received is that over the last several years, they've, for the most part, doubled the number of units in their portfolios that they're renting to people exiting homelessness. And with that, they've seen considerable service strain on their maintenance staff, on their service partners. And they've also seen an increase in evictions. And for them who have a mission of providing affordable housing, eviction is a failure for these organizations. It's also a failure for these families, and it's something we want to avoid. So in order to successfully rehouse households exiting homelessness, there needs to be those services available. And so our partners are saying, yes, we want to work towards this goal of 30%. In order to make sure it's successful, we need to make sure we have service coordinators, resident service coordinators that will ensure that the tenants can access the services they need. And so we've asked them, what would that look like? And so far in each of our conversations, they've said, yes, if we had one FTE at each of these 9 regional organizations, that could help deepen the ties to the service community and help work with these tenants to ensure that they're successfully housed. So we've just started those conversations within the Housing Recovery Working Group that includes AHS, and we'll continue to have that. I think our hope over the next month was to really drill down on what those positions would look like and what that ask would be in terms of funding. I know we also are looking at philanthropic sources that we can bring in and help supplement that, but it would need some state support in order to really be successful.
Other questions? Otherwise, I'm just looking. We have 50 minutes left according to the clock here. Other questions or other part? Thank you. This is really very helpful response. Get us started. And I think we'll be looking, obviously, a number of things I know are out there, potential projects that can be added, I would hope, over time that being worked on.
Can I just,
yes.
Just very brief. It's on the last page about the 30% applying only to rental units. If somehow you were able to house somebody that was previously unhoused and they somehow through some program or some combination of things, they were able to enter into home ownership, you certainly would be able to count those people as well in that category. I just wanted to be clear in that we weren't excluding people from home ownership.
Absolutely. It's just as we pull the data, we don't keep that tenant level data in-house. So it's in order to report on it. But yes, that would absolutely be a success.
Other comments or questions? Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, that's yours. Oh, I moved it. That's why it's over there.
Great, thank you.
Because I didn't think it was for me. All right, so now we're going on to Commissioner Conference. And included in the packet was a letter that I had sent on behalf of the committee for additional information, because when we were doing Act 81, we actually incorporated some of the requests of the administration, but we didn't really have a lot of time to flesh out the thinking behind it. And so appreciate your being here today, and we'll let you take it from there.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me. For the record, Josh Hanford, Commissioner of Housing and Community Development. And it's great to go after Polly and VHCB, since a lot of this is coordinated effort. And my responses are to your letter largely, but just wanted to recognize that since that letter received on July 6th, we've had severe flooding, which has impacted residents and communities across the state, and just highlight the importance of and recognize the fact that there's overlapping work here between what Act 81 looks to the issues it looks to solve and what we're dealing with now of impacted households to flooding. Early data 211 has self-reported over 4,000 residential units impacted, and over 700 self-reported units as uninhabitable. More FEMA information will verify that, and we'll get to a number. But we know, 14 mobile home parks were impacted, 4 of them receiving sustainable losses, substantial losses, including 61 uninhabitable mobile homes. We realized that FEMA support for folks that had damaged property, the maximum benefit is $41,000. So if we have someone's home that's uninhabitable, rental property that's uninhabitable, and repairing that, getting folks back in, and this focused work on the population, the cohort that this work contemplated helping, that AHS went over earlier, there's going to be overlap and there's going to be impacts in doing that work. On to the specific questions. The first was related to the manufactured home communities infill program, the 10 million that VHCB was asked to support infill, and some questions about, what do we know about the opportunities here, where they exist. So we've done a lot of work on this already. First, we have an annual mobile home park survey that all the mobile home park owners submit to the department. And we knew from that there were 326 vacant lots across the state and another 126 that could be made habitable. Varying amounts of work in those lots. Some of them are easy, minor repairs, some are substantial work. So to better understand that, we did a survey of mobile home park owners across the state, private, nonprofit, and co-op. And we received responses, and those were selected based on the priority areas from the AHS data for where we have the most unhoused that we need to try to find housing for. So we focused on those 5 regions, those 5 counties, and we had over, I think it was 23 mobile home park owner, 26 respond to our survey, which was a phone survey and a web follow-up, that had 82 vacant lots that could be ready for infill on an expedited timeline with no or minor repairs. In addition to that, our largest partner, Vermont State Housing Authority, which also has the largest mobile home park owner in the state, they had an additional 86 lots that could be potential for this infill program. So we also screen them against flood. None of these are in 100-year floodplain. None of these parks were impacted by the flood.
Well, that's encouraging. I was waiting for the but.
Yeah.
We also reached out to all the manufactured home dealers in the state and in bordering New York and New Hampshire, and found that within 6 to 8 weeks of ordering and purchasing, manufactured homes could be here. There's little existing stock, on the dealers, but they could get them in 6 to 8 weeks. And we also looked at the average price of these new energy efficient manufactured homes. These are HUD certified manufactured homes. The term mobile home is now manufactured home, and they become much more energy efficient. They're installed on a frost-free foundation that is stamped by an installer, a licensed installer. And so the cost has gone up quite a bit as well. So the cost of a new home on a site all hooked up is between $120,000 and $150,000. So this is quite an increase from some earlier estimates of sort of what this $10 million could buy in the number of lots. But still, when you compare the average development cost of a new affordable housing of $400,000, it's still significantly more affordable. So with this information and these estimates, we feel the one-time appropriation to VHCB to work on this pilot infill program could result in 60 to 80 infill and families rehoused in manufactured home communities in areas of high need. And so in working with VHCB, they've also started some outreach and talking, and we've talked about what the mechanisms would be in place to ensure public benefit of this money. Longstanding priority for petrol affordability and other mechanisms that would need to be in place to ensure we've got the right benefit for this. And there's lots of different options. I guess I would say, I think leaving VHCB the flexibility to determine what's the best course of action in the different mobile home park options and ownership levels is wise. The simplest could be, the VHIP model where we have a 5 to 10 year affordability period. It's a rental. That rental rate gets reported through the tax department, through the landlord rental certificate, where you can verify the rates are affordable. And over a period of time, that ends and goes away and that home continues to serve an affordable family or is purchased by an affordable family. We know our mobile home, our manufactured home community residents, by and large, are low income, all the way up to perpetual ownership by a nonprofit owner that could sustain that home and transition it to an affordable ownership. There's lots of ways to make this work depending on the ownership and the models that could be employed. And we've had those conversations with VHCB.
I really appreciate all of this and very helpful. I also appreciate that you keep on flipping back and forth between mobile home and manufactured homes, since people who live there tend to call them mobile homes. But I appreciate how it's sort of like modernizing towards manufactured. I have a fairly obnoxious question, which is, it sounds to me from everything you've said and I've read here that you could have 60 to 80 families housed in manufactured homes in the next 3 months. Is that what you're thinking?
That would be a goal.
I won't take it as a promise.
Yes, that would be a goal.
Just try to create timelines.
That's not too obnoxious. I think.
I know. I was going to give 6 months and think like that was really good.
But obviously, time is of the essence here. So the supply is out there, not necessarily in Vermont, but so the immediacy of that response is certainly attractive.
I think there is obviously an impact with the 61 homes that were just completely destroyed, and then another 20 that have major work. And so, we'd be competing against ourselves with a larger need than what this was specifically for the cohort that we're trying to exit from the motel program. But there seems to be supply and there seems to be lots that could easily be made ready to accept them.
And not in flood.
And not in flood.
You said. It is sort of a separate region, even though we're talking about. Okay, great, thank you.
Oh, yes, Representative.
So 2 questions. One is, what's the average configuration of these? How many bedrooms or how many square feet?
Yeah, that's a great question. The average is 80 feet long, and I think I remember if it's 14 or 18 feet wide, but 2-bedroom.
Okay.
The average
1,000 square feet.
Yeah, about 1,000 square feet.
Okay. And secondly, the folks that are in mobile homes that got destroyed in the recent flooding, where are they?
They're in a variety of places. That some of which we don't know, but folks that were totally displaced, hopefully they've reported to 211, registered with FEMA, and FEMA is starting to disperse payments to them. So initial temporary payments, they could be in a hotel, a motel, they could have found a rental someplace else with a family friend, could be in a short-term rental, Airbnb situation. And so the challenge that we're in right now, because there's a lot of attention on some mobile home parks, as there should be. I visited the 2 in Berlin and they're totally wiped out. I mean, they should be looking at a buyout down the road.
Is FEMA bringing in any trailers? Because I know in hurricane areas like Florida, they'll bring in trailers.
I could talk about that. That's a whole nother direct housing program through FEMA that is a whole nother piece of work that we're doing that's quite substantial.
Why don't we have that as part of our flood discussion on that? I guess what we're saying is that just compounds the challenge that we've got here.
I just wanted to check on the 2 in Washington County. One is out on the Barry Montpelier Road. Is the other one in Weston on Route 12?
No, they're both in Berlin. One is called Berlin Mobile Home Park that is right near the AOT garage when you come down the hill. And the other is River Run, which is just past the Dunkin' Donuts on 302 down
by the river.
And
Weston got hit in Irene, but I've seen it. It did all right this time.
It flooded, but and they evacuated temporarily, but everyone's back in. They raised those lots after Irene. The owner raised every single lot and it worked. I mean, they had some issues with the infrastructure, not being accessible, but the homes stayed dry.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
You got one more question? Oh.
So I can be quick. I could be quick.
All right.
The Manufactured Home Improvement and Repair Program, MER, we just funded last year with $4 million in ARPA funds You'll see in the write-up how successful that's been already. 96% of the funding has already been requested. We've had to put a hold on some of the programs. What we're finding, and our staff has visited 18 mobile home parks, I think, is for a $10,000 repair, we can keep someone housed where that home could be shut down. It could be uninhabitable and add to our homeless challenges. And so we think another $4 million in this program is going to be very timely and prevent upstream more homelessness. We've already had meetings with VHCB. Our attorneys have spoken about the most efficient way to transfer this money and essentially just add on to the program we already started just in February that's been very successful to date. And you can see numbers up there about the applicants and what we've been able to do.
All right, so that's going to keep people in their homes. It doesn't add to, it doesn't compound the problem, but it doesn't help provide any more capacity.
What it has done too is give us an eye into these mobile home parks, these manufactured home communities, and find where the better sort of opportunities are in the repairs and get some of these owners already aware that the state is trying to help them improve these communities. And so that's, we have more information about what to do in short term because we've already started to do it through this formal granting process.
We got to move right along.
Yep. Then we get to VHIP. You know about VHIP. 617 units to date. That includes a number that are under construction right now. About 75% have gone to rehouse families exiting homelessness. This $5 million from VHCB to support this effort, we'll do a couple things. One, it'll be targeted to those areas of the greatest need, and it'll be a chance to support these 5 homeownership centers that are doing this work with some little bit more capacity because they've been stretched thin. They can't do any more because they don't have enough staff to do more. And so we think this added support will just enhance that program and set it up for more future success. To address one of the questions you specifically asked, Senator Kitchell, you know, when someone is referred in exiting homelessness to a unit, they've got to have the ability to pay rent, whether that's from their own earned income or rental assistance. And the rental assistance piece, just as the service piece that VHCB mentioned, is critical for a landlord to be able to take any tenant. And so the challenge with the the housing voucher program, it's a federal program. It has federal rules. There's a coordinated process to award those vouchers and serve people exiting homelessness. But it's not a one-for-one, just the hotel population. It's everyone that needs housing that's in that system. And not all those individuals have a voucher at any given point. What is good about Act 81 and the work we've done to transition, now folks that are in that cohort have to be entered into the coordinated entry system so they can be offered a voucher, and it makes the whole process more efficient. Because if you don't have a way to pay rent, it's pretty hard to house someone.
This is just a request for the next meeting between VHCB and you, Commissioner, is could we have a written definition of what is meant by people exiting homelessness? Because I learned that it's not exactly what, we don't all necessarily have the same definition of that. And how does that differ from what we've asked in Act 81?
Yeah, just sort of an observation. In all of these presentations, there's been a little aside, and we need to pay more attention to this, about needing technical assistance or needing wraparound services, whether we need it for people helping maintenance technicians. In this case, you talk about most of these parks would benefit from additional technical assistance for long-term park viability. I'd suggest we talk to the SBDC about that, for example. But I think there are additional costs that we need to think about as a legislature as we're talking about building more units of whatever kind. There are other costs, whether it's wraparound services to the homeowners or to support the people who are building the homes, that we're going to have to pay attention to.
And just the last piece, I think Paula covered it well. The goal to rehouse folks at 30% dedicated to folks exiting homelessness. If we look at the turnover of units, in a year will actually be greater than the new units built in a year. And so that's a helpful way to help us achieve that shared goal.
Thank you. Other comments or questions?
I
Yes.
just back up.
Senator Westman?
The help for the communities themselves. I have a community that has put an extraordinary number of units in, and the community has had their local budget go down 3 times and headed towards a 4th low. And they need increased police, and there's a hump between getting those units in. And most of the units you're talking about, when they say you're going to get property tax off of them, do not pay for themselves in the community, so they're facing a tax increase.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now the last housing related is the update on the council. And Commissioner Hanford, you're one of the co-chairs along with Secretary Samuelson. And we just wondered, this was created in the governor's executive order, and obviously it's intended to be kind of the place where all this work and policy development and data analysis is being brought together. So I guess you're the designated hitter. I don't see Secretary Samuelson coming up.
I can tell you that I think we have the same update. So all of the positions have been appointed. All the folks that have, we had to choose from, the various organizations that were mentioned have all been submitted to the governor, picked, and have been informed. We're trying to get the first meeting scheduled. Unfortunately, we weren't able to move as fast on this with the flooding and just getting sidetracked, but that has all happened. Folks have been informed. And I think the goals of that council looking towards establishing what do we need for units by region, by type, how are we going to achieve that, and how are we going to measure ourselves against that goal is work that is happening in various other places already right now in a very consistent way, but having it housed with this new council and having an annual report to bring that all together. And we're having these same discussions with towns and with RPCs. They're all looking to establish their goal for housing needs and then a plan to how to achieve it that you can measure yourself against. You know, I think we all know the challenges, the workforce, the construction, all that, but having a goal and then measuring how you're doing is the first place you start. And so that effort is underway. This council will bring it together and provide a good way to.
Organization is, okay.
Do you have technical assistance on that council to provide strategic planning support for you all, or are you doing that?
That is a great question. I think we've identified that for that committee to have the sort of bandwidth to be successful, it would be great to have someone help facilitate some of that work, because everyone on that council is a leadership level position, and it's great for setting goals and making decisions, but we will need a body of work to happen and that to be directed. And so I don't have an answer other than that we've identified it and talked about it and seeing if we can find some resources to support that work.
I love that. Thank you.
It would be very helpful in the council if, as we talk about this, we talk about 40,000 units statewide. Where do we have septic capacity? What do we have for septic capacity? What do we have for water? The first thing any developer does is look at what they can get for infrastructure, septic and water. And transportation or access to highways is something after that. But clearly, I haven't seen any report put together or clear of what we need in that. And I would say in the earlier documents we saw about the presentation of 750 out of the 1,200 or 1,000 need 1-bedroom units. And we've never been able to highlight where we need and what we need for units. It's a lot different building a 1-bedroom unit than building a 3-bedroom.
Agreed. Our current housing needs assessment does dive into that a little bit. We know we need more 1 and 2 bedroom rather than family units. We have there's a regional breakdown in our existing housing needs assessment that talks about strategies of rehabilitation versus net new. But this work will help refine that, as well as bring in that info about where the infrastructure exists. Because you're right, you can't solve this problem without infrastructure, which gets into the greater challenge of our flooding. And I think where we have some of that infrastructure, there's some challenges with those historic developed areas in relation to our floodplain and where our rivers are. And we need to think long-term about how to address that.
I just had a community lose its sewage treatment.
Right.
Right. I think Winooski did there for a while. All right, thank you. Well, we'll look forward to the work of the council. And Secretary Samuelson, the executive order said either AHS secretary or deputy, and she's informed me that she is going to be serving as the co-chair. So thank you for that. Now we're going to move on to another topic. The 2023 storms, and we have Kristen. Is Kristen? Oh yeah. Oh, there you are, Kristen Clauser, Secretary of Administration, and Secretary Curley from Commerce and Community Development, and then I don't know whether. Why don't we do the first one as it relates? This is the business grants. And then we have just finished up a proposal that we'll be taking up at the e-board this afternoon that will help households that have experienced damage. So we'll start with the business grants, and then we'll do a brief summary of what is being proposed to assist homeowners. And thank you for helping us over the weekend get something ready for action on the homeowner front as well. So thank you. So Secretary Clauser, are you the lead presenter?
I think so. So just by proximity, I suppose. So I'm glad to be here.
And I hope your birthday party went well.
It did.
Oh, good.
9-year-olds don't notice when mom ducks out every once in a while, so skated through. For the record, I'm Kristen Clauser. I'm the Secretary of Administration. I have with me Deputy Secretary Doug Farnham. He is going to give a little bit of insight on kind of the economic gaps we've identified with respect to federal funding and additional aid that's coming into the state. And then Secretary Curley is with me as well, specifically to talk about the business grants. We were going to talk generally flood relief and response first, and then get into the business grants, if that makes sense in terms of scheduling.
That's great, thank you.
Okay, so I don't think I need to remind anyone on this panel, the 36 hours of steady rain we received on July 10th and 11th, and subsequent storms afterwards, which led to catastrophic funding in many areas of the state. Because of the forecast prior to that event, there was already a declared state of emergency, which Governor Scott declared on July 9th. That allowed FEMA resources to come immediately to the state. They were here prior to the flooding event. That also activated the State Emergency Operations Center, which.
So would the 9th include the funding, because there was the washout in Killington? So it would.
Yes.
That would be. Okay.
That's right. So the event started on the 9th.
On the 9th.
Which is the Friday flooding events in Killington.
Because there was obviously weather before the big.
That's right. And mudslides and washouts. And that kind of led to the situation where additional rainfall on top of already saturated lands and increase the impact of what was, historic levels of rain in some areas, over 9 inches of recorded rain in that 36-hour period, which is really significant. So because of that early declaration, the State Emergency Operations Center was already in place. We have been able to leverage resources from other states. We had swift water teams strategically in place in areas of expected flood
flood so that we could respond as quickly as possible. And I will say, despite being 3 weeks out from those events first started, because of the initial storm and then subsequent storms afterwards, every couple of days, it did take 7 to 10 days before we could really start shifting more into recovery and less in immediate response and health and safety concerns. So now we have some information that we can provide, but it's really important to understand that this is very preliminary. We're still pulling in data. This data I'm about to talk about is as of Thursday evening, so it's probably changed significantly since then, and we'll continue to talk about where we are as those numbers climb. But it's just really important to understand that this is preliminary data with respect to damage and early estimates of impact. So state infrastructure damage. There were 18 state buildings that were impacted by the flood. Thousands of employees have been displaced. Luckily, thanks to all of the technological advancements during the pandemic, we were able to switch almost immediately to remote work, and then have been able to find COOP locations for many of the departments and agencies that can't work remotely but needed to work. So there was a minimal impact and for state government operations, which is good news. But we will be dealing with bringing these buildings back online over the course of the next several months. Some buildings with lesser impacts will hopefully be back online mid-August. Others will take at least another 90 days to come back online because of the way the flooding impacted the major systems of those buildings that were located in the basement of big old buildings. So we have elevator damage and HVAC damage and data damage and you name it. So there's some buildings that will take longer to come back online. We had several state parks that sustained damage. We're working to bring those back online as we speak. 136 state roads and 3 bridges sustained damage. 1 bridge was destroyed. 305 miles of state-owned rail lines were closed due to flooding and significant washout damage.
Before you keep, I noticed.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Representative Lamfer's got her hand up. Emily just gave me a poke to bring attention to your hand up. Sorry. Your question.
Thank you, Madam Chairs. I did have a question about the state buildings. You said 18 state buildings were impacted. And I'm just going to make an assumption on that the location of them were primarily in either Waterbury or Montpelier. Would that be correct?
Yes, so the vast majority of those were in downtown Montpelier. We had some buildings kind of outside the downtown area, including Waterbury, that had a little bit of damage to the grounds, right? The parking lot of Waterbury, but there was no damage to the Waterbury State Office complex, no water inside that building. The same is said for the public safety building and in Waterbury. Some of the buildings outside of the immediate downtown area in Montpelier sustained minimal damage. DOL, for example, had an inch or so in the basement of that building, but we were able to get that out really quickly and dry that building out. So some buildings outside of downtown Montpelier sustained very minimal damage and are back online now. Currently, it's downtown Montpelier.
Great. Well, thank you. I had actually had a conversation with the chair of House Institutions and Corrections as they went on a tour of some of the damage and had heard that are the tunnel and things. The flooding impacted the mechanical rooms, but mostly the elevators, which, and from what I'm hearing you say, that it'll be a short time before they're back online. The ability to operate the elevators is going to be, the ADA compliant piece in those buildings. So my
That's exactly
question-
right. So
The elevators can be back online that fast?
nope. So there, out of the 18 buildings, there are some buildings that will be back online by mid-April, or I'm sorry, mid-August. That's right. But some of our larger buildings, like 133, for example, the elevators were impacted. 109, the pavilion, the elevators were impacted. There are a couple of other buildings where the elevators are impacted. They will have a much longer time period before they can get back online. Those buildings also had major systems impacted in addition to the elevators. The elevators in old buildings are programmed to go to the basement when the power goes off. So that's where they all were.
There's only like one elevator mechanic in the whole region too, I think.
That's right. Well, now there's two. But the real problem with the elevators are parts. The supply chain issue on elevator parts is sometimes 18, 20 weeks before we can actually get the parts in for those. So you're exactly right. The elevators will take longer. And when in the buildings where those have been impacted, they will be offline for a longer period of time.
So that would be as we go forward with this and assessing the damage and the cost of getting an accounting will develop over time as to the impact and the cost to the state as their buildings become more and more evaluated as well. So that'll be a part of our bigger flood relief piece is what is our buildings and what are we going to do in the future to make sure that this doesn't happen or at least minimize it in the future, huh?
That's right. I can jump there next, which is early estimates of damage.
Do that because we
Thank you.
probably need to.
You're running over.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for.
Clearly your timekeeper as well, Madam Chair.
I think that.
Taskmaster, he's the taskmaster.
No, well, I think I'm well aware. I keep looking at the clock, so I don't want to rush because this is really important and obviously people want to have a good sense. But if you could.
The document you're talking of, do we have that here?
No. Oh, these are just these are actually my talking points prepared for something totally different that I'm just stealing bits and pieces of it to present to you today.
That all legislative briefing.
Yeah.
Didn't we get some information?
Is there a way to get a summary from?
Yes, so there's a recording of the all legislative briefing that I believe Kendall Smith sent around last week to all the legislators. That has much of the information I'm talking about today, but more importantly, it has a lot of the resources that are available for those impacted by flooding. So we can send that back around. That's a recording of that briefing and then all of the questions. We also have, if you go to vermont.gov/flood, that is a landing page that has all of the resources available as well. But it doesn't have.
I'm not as interested in the resources because I do have the Kendall's in that list. I'm more interested in being able to hone in on what the damage was.
Sure. So I have early estimates of what we have thus far as of last week for damage. Additional damage is coming in daily. So I know I've said that ad nauseum, but I want to repeat it again. Our total estimated damage for state buildings exceeds $45 million. A lot of that depends on what systems can be salvaged and what systems have to be totally replaced. So we expect that to exceed 45 million. We don't know how much more it will be yet. Real property damage from individuals reported to FEMA as of last week was over $8.4 million. Total estimated damage that's just real property damage reported to FEMA from individuals, $8.4 million as of last week. So the total, right, that's just real property damage. It doesn't include, that's right. Then there's the total FEMA public assistance estimate of damages, right? That's roads, bridges, or infrastructure, essentially. That's
$92 million, over $92 million. Total estimate of damage for the federal highways, impacted state and federal highways is another $36 million. Again, that's as of last week, so it may be entirely different. In addition, we have $10 million of individual assistance reported to FEMA as well, but that number is going to continue to skyrocket as FEMA gets in there and does individual assessments with folks. We have 9 counties that have been approved for individual assistance, 11 counties that have been approved for public assistance, and then all counties have been approved for FEMA funding for emergency protective measures and hazard mitigation statewide. And that individual assistance includes things like temporary housing units, repair, replacement of owner-occupied home, hazard mitigation assistance, and kind of a medley of other things that folks would be available for that they can stack through the individual assistance program or FEMA.
So are you including municipal expenses or loss, like town highways, town roads?
So
that one of these numbers?
So that there may be pieces of, again, this is what was reported to us from FEMA, right? Or reported to FEMA, I should say. So that may include pieces of municipal damage through the public assistance estimated damages.
The individual, even if you combine both numbers, it still seems really low.
That's right.
Is that, I mean, is FEMA behind in terms of processing applications? This is only what has been actually filed and reviewed?
So over 3,000 residents have applied for individual assistance thus far.
Yeah.
And again, this is as of Friday, right? That's as good as my numbers are. There have been over 2,000 home inspections requested. FEMA's completed 1,400, just over 1,400 of those.
These numbers more than double.
These are
very early.
Likely very low, very early baseline numbers. It's just what we have thus far.
So you're giving us close to $200 million right now, total damage. I don't even know if that includes commercial property loss. So there could be another 50 to 100 million there. I don't know. I'm guessing. What on average is match requirements?
So it depends on the time, it depends on the damage, it depends on the county. There's a 30, and Doug has been dealing with a lot of the FEMA federal funding and how it overlaps with ARPA. So he is free to jump in and correct me or add to this at any time. There's a 30-day period, which we have not designated yet, that's 100% match. Response and recovery efforts are typically 100% match. Certain programs also have higher match. If we hit a particular level of a threshold of damage, then it shifts from a 25% match to a 10% match.
We do like the 90-10.
Yeah, yes.
And that's why people should call 211.
Yes, absolutely.
We believe that the threshold is 112 million, but it is somewhat discretionary on FEMA's part. They have to make that decision. So it's not an automatic trigger, but we do anticipate it's around 112 million of verified public assistance and individual assistance.
And we've requested 100% of FEMA reimbursement. There hasn't been a decision yet from FEMA, but that was the request, and that's what we've been working with our federal delegation to push. I think it's unlikely that we receive that, but we're trying.
This is for the state expenses?
Yes.
Okay, so the state buildings, highway.
So for state buildings, it's going to be a patchwork of things. We do have flood insurance through the National Flood Insurance. We have private flood insurance that we maintain. We can access that flood insurance up to our $45 million cap. There's a deductible required for that. That will be probably between $5 and $10 million by the time we're done to leverage that $45 million of funding. And then FEMA funding would be available on top if the damage goes beyond our insurance limits. FEMA will come in and be available. And there's certain grants and programs dealing with mitigation that we may be able to fund to leverage FEMA for as well.
I'd like to indicate that we're going to be scheduling our September meeting earlier in September. So, which will mean we've got the benefit of the August experience, and that should give us obviously a lot more information that we would have available at that point. So I'm going to move from more questions to finishing up and then moving into the business grants. And then we'll go into what we have for individual assistance as well with with Peter Walk. So
Secretary Curley is here to tell us.
Unless it's more information about, but we're kind of going over an update on what we have.
I'm happy to chat individually with folks and provide information on what we have thus far.
Is there like a week update, for all the information you've given relative to damages reported from public assistance individual? I'm just wondering, maybe that help answer some of them.
We do file addenda to the declaration with FEMA that lists damages, but by the time we have that information, it's likely stale because it's collected and then presented.
Is that on the website that you mentioned?
Oh, the flood.
The FEMA declarations, I can check on that. We can send them to you. I can check to see if we put the FEMA declarations out there.
So I guess at this point, I'm going to move on to the business grant proposal that has been advanced. It's going to be part of the e-board action this afternoon to help fund that program that has been presented to our joint economic development committees and commerce committees last week. So if there are not any further questions and looking at the time, I'm going to move on to Secretary Curley.
Great. For the record, I'm Lindsay Curley, Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. I know you were pressed for time, so I'll give you a little bit about this and then let you direct how many details you want to go into here. As Secretary Clauser mentioned, as the days have unfolded after the severe storms, we've worked diligently to try to identify gaps that existed with respect to harm around the state. And it became very evident that one area that we were seeing very quickly was with respect to the business community. And certainly folks have lost their homes. It's devastating. And there are some resources and tools to help in that arena. But with our businesses, people who provide jobs and keep our communities going, there was very little. I do want to acknowledge SBA Disaster does have loans. They're very helpful to those that will qualify. There are some good terms, no payments for a year and no interest for a year. So again, I don't want to not acknowledge that, but for some that won't qualify or who are still very
highly leveraged.
Thank you.
If that's what
highly leveraged.
Actually, I have a copy of the PROS program.
Okay.
And maybe we should just make it available to committee members. It's the Emergency Gap Assistance Program, and it's 20 million. And I can maybe we could have copies made because I think that would help.
That would be great. I apologize. I assumed everybody had it, but
yeah, don't copy the back of this. I recycle, reprint on the other side.
So I'll talk sort of slowly while you do that. But so the purpose of the program is to provide $20 million to businesses and nonprofits that sustain physical damages. So this is not for economic injury. Right now, we are focused on physical damages And applicants, the goal is for them to, they need to establish that they do intend to be open and bring back their employees and get back to work or get to work on repairing the damages as soon as possible. We know that this will not fix everything. This is really an emergency cash flow for them to get started on some of that work. Some folks are afraid to hire somebody to, do the cleaning or to rip out a floor that needs to be ripped out, because if they don't have the money to pay for that, they don't want to be on the hook to owe somebody if they don't have the very cash needed to pay that person that they've hired to do the work. So the way we have designed this program is that we would provide the lesser of 20% of their net uncovered damages with a cap of $20,000. So what does net uncovered damage mean? That means they are going to demonstrate to us what their damage is, and that could be in the form of estimates or actual invoices that they've incurred, and less any flood insurance they may have. And what we're asking them to show us are grants or donations that have been provided to them for the purpose of repairs, right? So if they have received a grant to repair a floor, we don't want to provide them with a grant to repair that floor again, right? So if they've received a grant or a donation for something completely outside of damages, that's fine. We're not going to, have them deduct that. But if they've used a grant or donation already to defray the cost of damages, we need to deduct that from our calculation. So, so that's how the calculation will be done. We will, for applicants who have net uncovered damages greater than $1 million, we do have another category we'll look at, and we'll provide the lesser of 20% of the net uncovered damages, or there are a few thresholds depending on how many FTEs there are. So again, remember, our goal here is to bring employees back to work, get the doors open. So there will be a weighted, based on the fact that they have more employees and they're getting more people back to work.
If they've already opened and they've gone into debt to do that, this will cover.
They can still apply. Absolutely. We won't hold that against them. We recognize that, some are able to leverage it in a variety of ways and get moving. So
I have a story that the new owners have been there 30 days. And they've reopened.
Oh, yeah. We've heard some stories where there were businesses that literally closed that day. The closings were that day. So, yeah, we're going to work with people. We want them to succeed. Do you want to go to?
Thank you. I've been reading that some businesses have been doing GoFundMe campaigns.
Right.
And is there some way you're able to tell whether, they're raising $100,000, it could be for general purposes, which may go to the floor.
Right.
So you have some way to figure out what.
We're asking.
You're just asking them to attest?
We're asking them to attest. And again, we recognize, this is going to be on, your honor. Again, I don't know if you've walked through the downtowns, like I've said to people, again, I'm honest. You have to look at your neighbor and know that if you take more than your harm, you have to remember that you're looking at the person next to you who didn't get that. So we're just really hoping. We also, I have to say, you're getting 20% of your net damages, and it's like, again, there's arguably going to be a large gap that you have to fill, and we do want people to stack there, whether it be loans or other grants. We want people to stack to try to come up with it. And one number I heard, and I don't know if this number has changed, but in Montpelier, for example, I heard the average business loss was $186,000. So if somebody gets $20,000 for their damages, it's right. There's still going to be a long way. So I know this is not perfect. We're trying to make sure that people aren't, we don't have a duplication of benefits. Right. We're going to do the best we can, but I'm also acknowledging that this is.
It's hard and it's not enough, and we understand.
Yeah.
But it's something.
Full disclosure, yeah.
Other questions? As I said, our two committees had a lot of testimony last week, as well as your presentation of the proposal. Yes, Senator Cummings.
Is this going out as, do they have to upfront the repair, or is this going out as cash?
It's going out as cash. They don't have to upfront it. We also recognize, again, like coming on the heels of COVID, there are so many people that are.
They need cash.
They need cash, yes.
Other questions? Thank you. And now we're going to move on to, and I don't know if you want to stay for this, Secretary.
I'm happy to stay if helpful.
Well, one never knows. When help would be necessary.
That is true.
Thank you.
I'll give up my middle seat though. How's that?
All right, that's right. More in a supportive role.
That's right.
All right, so our next witness is Peter Walk, Managing Director of Efficiency Vermont. And over the last several days, there's been an awful lot of work to look at where we have appropriations that are out that really could be directed toward helping flood victims. And this is really looking at households, many of which have experienced significant loss, heating systems, appliances, and so forth. So what we have is another area of providing some financial relief to Vermont households. And this will also be taken up this afternoon at the E-Board, this use of funds. So if you would like to just give us hot off the press.
Can I just say that as we look at Montpelier and how quickly it is recovering, a lot of that credit goes to Peter, who managed the thousands of volunteers, and that is no small task.
Well, that's public recognition, well-deserved. Thank you. And now you're going to even get more recognition for what we have before us today. And I know that people were working over the weekend, and you were in the Adirondacks on going to a funeral, and Secretary Clouser was trying to have a birthday party, and Jen Carby was trying to camp, and all of us were in the midst of trying to get something ready for today. So it was quite a combined effort, and I just want to recognize everybody, and Representative Kornheiser. If I got more emails from you, I was. So with that said, if you want to just give us sort of a review of how we distilled what you were putting forward in terms of action today. So appreciate your being here on such short notice.
Sure. For the record, Peter Walk, Managing Director of Efficiency Vermont. It's a pleasure to be with you. While there was a lot of work the past few days, I think that's government leadership at its best, coming together to solve problems that people are facing. So I think this is a great way to dovetail with the presentation from Secretary Curley on the business side. This is an attempt to provide some relief and financial aid to those residents who have been impacted by flooding and who have lost critical equipment as part of that flooding, right? Heating systems, hot water systems, other sort of key appliances within a home, and to provide that opportunity, especially for our low and moderate income neighbors, to be able to provide assistance to go beyond what FEMA might reimburse them for to the most efficient available models available to them, to really lean into providing that assistance so they can have reduced their energy burden in the long run, but really to be able to make this change, to be able to stand in and help with assistance in this moment when they're all thinking about how do I heat my homes? How do I provide hot water for my family over the course of the next few months? This is the moment. And so I appreciate the response from the legislature and the administration to step forward and say, this is the right thing to do in this moment. So the idea is to repurpose, to move from $35 million in weatherization that was to flow through Efficiency Vermont, through the Public Service Department, to up to $10 million of that money to another purpose by which the Public Service Department can then use it to grant to Efficiency Vermont to manage this program, to get resources out the door to those flood victims who need it as quickly as possible, to make it available to single-family homes, to multifamily dwellings, to owners and renters, and figure out the landlord rental combination as quickly as possible so that we can make sure that those resources are available this coming heating season.
Questions or yes?
Quick question, thank you for this. Does this include all 14 counties, not just the FEMA designated counties? I'm not, I don't remember what the executive order was.
So,
Right. Well, I mean, flood impacted,
yes.
right?
So somebody, Addison County isn't, but I've had talked to constituents who have lost things, so they would be eligible to apply.
Yes, if they were impacted by the flood.
Yes.
They would be eligible.
Okay, and somehow they'll know how to do that.
And yes, we're in early stages of ensuring.
You don't have to be a FEMA designated
Right,
area
that's my
in order
concern.
to qualify.
Right.
That's right. This is not, it's not FEMA money. It's
Right.
the allocation of ARPA money within an allowable use for ARPA, which is not dependent on a FEMA designation.
And you have some communication and outreach plan so that people will know that they can apply for this?
So that's what Efficiency Vermont does, is communications and outreach. And so we will get this out to, and we're going to partner with state agencies on their ability to communicate directly with those who filed through 211 and all other means to get information out as quickly as possible. The moment that we're in right now is the decision-making cycle that people are in, right? I've talked to folks on the ground, as Senator Cummings mentioned, I took a week off and I helped organize volunteer efforts in Montpelier. I understand on the ground what people are going through. I had lots of conversations with business owners and with residents who are trying to figure out what decisions to make first. And they're starting to think about, especially as we, finally felt some relief the past couple of days and cool mornings, an indication the winter is coming.
Like late summer, didn't it? Senator Cummings has a question or a comment?
No, I've asked everybody else, I'll ask you. I know we've had supply chain issues, both with heat pumps, those kinds of things, also with furnaces. And we've got essentially a 3-month window to get heat into people's homes. Have we looked into the availability of this is the time to make the changeover if you can, but can we get the product?
Yes. So that's one of the first things that we did was ask that question. And we stay on top of that all the time. We have a team that is actually devoted to managing the supply chain so that we can make sure that when we incentivize something that it's available and can be used. Obviously, that doesn't, it's not perfect, right? There are challenges and we don't normally have to replace this sort of scale at the same time. At the same time, that needs to be our focus. We are going to do everything we can within the supply chain to make sure that those resources are available. As it comes to furnaces and other things, as the focus in Vermont policy has shifted away from more efficient fuel oil or propane-based systems to electrification and biomass and the like, though we don't have as clear a sense of what the supply chain looks like, but that's certainly something that we can partner with the Fuel Dealers Association and others to think about.
I just don't want to see us increase our homeless population because we get to November and we don't have heat in homeless. And people will do anything to keep their families warm. So we need to really be up.
Right. And this is our opportunity to help them have the best available options.
Other comments or questions?
I just want to make a quick comment if I could, Madam.
Yes.
Just to tie on to that. So Efficiency Vermont ran an HVAC program for us following the immediate impact of the pandemic. And we had all the same concerns about supply chain. And you did an amazing job as an organization queuing up all of those hundreds of districts. And we were able to service 200 plus districts with new HVAC. So I have every confidence in you. And I thank you publicly for bailing us out on that emergency and now taking on this. So it's great to have Efficiency Vermont there.
And on that note, I'm just letting you know in 10 to 15 minutes, to add to our time pressure. There is a fire alarm test.
Can't we just tell them no?
And there will be a voice over a speaker and 2 short announcements, and they're sorry for the interruption. But we don't have to exit the.
We don't have to exit, just put our fingers in our ears.
Okay.
There'll be something coming over the speaker.
So just to alert you,
Madam Chair?
Yes.
So when will this program be available?
Oh, this is it. Oh, it is very. Like a TV. Yes, Representative Wood on that note.
I just was wondering, what's the timeframe for this to be active on your website and?
Sure. There's likely to be a 2-step process. The first is to get information out that help is coming, not dissimilar to the way the business grants were communicated, so that folks knew that help was coming and they could start to incorporate that into their decision making. We need to develop the plane as we fly it. So there's much work to be done there. The other piece is we will need to go through a granting process with the Public Service Department. We are looking for other sources of funds that we could use that could potentially move quicker, that say are subject to the PUC's jurisdiction over our budget. If we can do that, then we can start to move on some things more quickly. The other piece we may consider, as you just heard from the administration, there is the same level of challenge and fewer resources available to the businesses impacted. We may have some funds that are less constrained that we could use to help there. We're going to explore that concept, but the program in front of you is entirely for residential. We will continue to explore and see what makes what's possible, but we want to get communication as quickly as possible out to folks that help is coming, and then communicate the specifics as people begin to share more information.
So that actually ends up, in my district at least, creating more anxiety as opposed to less by saying help is coming and then not telling people how that help is coming, businesses and residential. I'm not sure that communication strategy is helpful.
Or some time frame of
when, yeah.
If I'm going to talk about this and I'm going to walk into a community that's devastated, I need to say, we hope to have it up by
September, October, whenever.
Yes.
If they have some idea.
Well, perhaps we can get that information out a little. You have to recognize this was put together, and the document you have was finalized about 9:30 last night. So there's more information coming, and obviously urgency, time, we forget. But one thing is certain, winter is going to be upon us too quickly. So I think everybody understands the urgency here to move, and we'll get maybe more information out as it becomes available.
And I do appreciate the questions about timing, and anything we communicate will project out when additional details will follow, so people will know that and when to look. We will do everything I can to move this as fast as possible.
Great. Thank you very much. At this, I'm going to move on to the next items, and these are all action. Thank you both. Good to see you. Both of you at one, I'm sure. And because we're meeting, we have a number of grant approvals, and we want to move through them pretty quickly. They've been sent out. One is a very large one here. Why don't we get started? The first one is JFO number 3115, and that is a very large number of positions. I know this is something some people have been contacted about, getting the positions approved, and this is for the preschool development grant. And so this is an action item to approve the creation of these limited service positions that would be supported under this grant. Yes, Representative.
The is that in our budget for the various agencies? The required 30% match. I know some of it's from outside organizations, but the match, is that in our budget as passed?
I'm not in appropriations, so I shouldn't answer the
It's not my area,
question.
so I don't know, but maybe Diane or Robin.
Or
Richie.
Or
Richie.
legislative counsel Sarah Clark would know. I would assume that,
We also have
Commissioner
the commissioners.
is here, he would,
okay, why don't we, actually, Deputy Commissioner, right? Why don't you come up and maybe you can answer that question?
I mean, there's 800,000 for DCF, there's Agency of Education, it's got 212, et cetera.
And the short answer is yes.
Welcome, yes.
So,
You want to put yourself on the record and
Sure. Yep, Jan McLaughlin, Deputy Commissioner in Department of Children and Families overseeing the Child Development Division. And will you just repeat the question again? Sorry.
It's the match
So
budget.
the match required for this
Yes.
grant, to accept this grant, is that in our budget, or are we going to have to sort of pull this out of the air somewhere?
The match is planned and it's largely planned through philanthropic match with partners that are part of the grant overall. So
Okay, but 800,000 for DCF, is that in your budget?
it's included as reporting we're getting in from our partners. I might have to get back to you on this. I know that's all, or Shayla, sorry, I'm relatively new to state government, so these exact specific questions.
so, all right, well,
Shayla Livingston, who's gonna, she's smiling today. Welcome, Shayla.
Hi, everybody. Shayla Livingston.
Answer to the question.
Yes, Policy Director for the Agency of Human Services for the record. So yes, it's in our budget. We do not need more money.
Okay, that was what I meant to say.
All right. So any other questions about this? Obviously, this is something that you've been tracking. It's been part of the discussion, I imagine.
Yes, we had an extensive.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Sorry for the interruption. I just noted that on the agenda, the JFO number is 3115, and on the actual document, it's 3155.
3155.
Okay,
It's 3155.
thank you.
we will correct the agenda.
What number is it supposed to be?
3155.
So yes, Madam Chair, we had a presentation about this. It's expected. This will help our system of care really move forward.
So on that note, would you like to make a motion?
I would love to make a motion that we approve the positions. Oh, we have a specific thing here. Okay. I move to approve 14 limited service positions, 7 at the Department for Children and Families, 2 at the Department of Health, 1 at the Department of Mental Health, 3 at the Agency of Education, and 1 at the Office of Racial Equity. The positions are funded under a grant from the previously approved preschool development grant, JFO number 2970.
We have a second, Senator Cummings. Unless there's further discussion, I'll call the roll.
Senator Baru.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Harrison, yes. Representative Lanford.
Yes.
Representative Scheid.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
yes,
I think that was a yes.
Senator Sears, you were muted.
sorry, yes,
Senator Westman.
Yes.
Representative Wood.
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yeah. Should we be holding the vote?
What?
Is there a problem?
All right, guys. The motion is for 14 limited service positions, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
And the grant manager position was moved from Department of Health to Department of Children and Families.
Okay.
And so that should be 8 at Department of Children and Families, 1 at Department of Health, and 1 at Department of Mental Health.
Oh. All right, so you need to,
So amended in my motion.
all right. Thank you.
So it's 8, 1, and 1.
All right.
Okay.
Yes. All right.
Senator Kitchell.
Let me,
Okay,
before I
so-
vote, that correction, does it impact anybody's vote on the approval of the grant, of the limited service positions? Okay. I'll vote yes. Yes. Oh, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Yes,
No,
yes.
it's fine.
Okay, thank you for that. So the vote was 10-0.
All right, now we'll move on to a grant 3156. It says 2 limited service positions to the Agency of Human Services. And we have
He's right
someone.
there.
Oh, okay. Philip Colling is here remotely. Do we have questions? We have the explanation of the request, and it's to recruit and support and train AmeriCorps members, partially funded. So anything that you would like to add to the request, Mr. Colling, regarding the 2 limited service positions at the Agency of Human Services?
Hi, yes. The only thing I'll add is that we just received notice that for next year, they're going to be moving to 18-month grant periods for these grants. So we are expecting that from January 1, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. The 2 grants in question will be funded, and the numbers for those for the commission support grant, they're giving us $295,000, and for the commission investment fund, that will be $406,000. So those grants we anticipate will continue to be funded.
Well, that's good news. Further questions, discussion? If not,
I'll move to approve 2 limited service positions at the Agency of Human Services funded by ongoing grants from the Corporation for National and Community Service, AmeriCorps.
second? Second. We have lots of them. I guess Senator Cummings said it first.
Okay.
Further discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Senator Baruch.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Senator Harrison, yes. Representative Lanford.
Yes.
Representative Scheid.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes.
Can't hear you. Oh, yes.
Okay. Senator Sears says yes, I believe. Senator Westman.
Yes.
Representative Wood.
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
10-0.
Now we're on to request 3157, and it's 300,000 to the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets from the Natural Resources Conservation Service for 1 limited service position. Do we have anyone who wants to speak to this request here? Yes, on the screen. We have Mary Montour, who's with the Agency of Agriculture. You want to speak to the request?
Good morning. So this is a request for a limited service position to support essentially a grazing technical assistance provider at our agency. And this position would be supporting direct assistance to farmers to enhance their grazing management practices, and also in coordination with other external partners. And it's being funded through a grant from the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And the way I like to look at the grant is the grant will be fully funding the position, and then we'll be matching the grant with our current financial cost share programs. So we currently have grant programs for farmers to do these practices. And I'm here for any questions that people might have.
Any questions? Someone like to make a motion?
I will move to approve $300,000 in 1 limited service position at the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets to provide technical assistance to small farms to support grazing management systems, funded by a grant from USDA and the Natural Resources Conservation Service.
Second? Second from Senator Westman. There's no further discussion. The clerk will call the roll.
Senator Baruch.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Harrison, yes. Representative Lanford.
Yes.
Representative Scheid.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes.
Senator Westman.
Yes.
Representative Wood.
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
10-0.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to what?
Actually, we just need to go back to the original motion on the PDG grant, because it should be 2 positions at the health department, not 1, to match up with the grant documentation. So we just want to go back to the original motion as written. Yes.
Yep, not the corrected one.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So I guess we will, do we re-vote this?
Does Teresa need to
I think it's
withdraw?
probably cleaner if you do, probably.
What?
I think it's cleaner if you do.
Okay. All right, so why don't we go back to grant 3155? And what we're doing is the motion as originally stated by Representative Wood, not the one that had the numbers corrected, which is what we voted on. So we're going to go back and re-vote the original motion that was offered by Representative Wood. Do you want to restate it?
Okay, so I move to approve 14 limited service positions, 7 at the Department for Children and Families, 2 at the Department of Health, 1 at the Department of Mental Health, 3 at the Agency of Education, and 1 at the Office of Racial Equity. The positions are funded under a grant from the previously approved preschool development grant, JFO number 2970.
And the second, I believe, was Senator Cummings?
I think it was, yeah.
You're doing some good seconds.
Okay. So we have to re-vote this.
I did this in ink, so let me know now if I need to start a new sheet. You ready?
Yes, please come.
Okay, Senator Baru.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Harrison, yes. Representative Lamfer.
Yes.
Representative Scheid.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes.
Senator Westman.
Yes.
Representative Wood.
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
10-0.
Thank you.
Good job, Vote.
All right, so now we're going to move on, and we have one more, which is a position change request. And this is something that was familiar when we did the child care bill and the positions there. There was language that allowed, if in fact the positions upon final determination needed to be different than what we included in the bill, that the Joint Fiscal Committee had the authority to make the change and make the positions consistent with where the work and the positions titles to be updated based on more information. So what we have is a request from the Department of Children and Families to change the titles of the positions from what were included in the bill. So we need a motion to simply, it involves no more money, it's simply truing up the position titles with the work to be done. Yes.
Maybe AHS can answer it, but it seems like, and I don't know what these people do, not my area of the budget, but we're taking position that someone who actually does the licensing work and then adding a supervisor, is that?
There is a supervisor, but the supervisors also carry caseloads. So we will get an increase in the number of people being able to do the direct licensing work, in addition to being able to spread out the supervision responsibilities.
Okay, that's good. Secondly, it looked like you're going to use existing funds within your budget for match? No, I'm sorry, the extra cost of it's a higher pay grade, right?
There was a sufficient appropriation for the administrative costs to include this, and there still is additional funds to support communications and IT.
Will this affect our budget next year?
Now, these were all anticipated when we did the bill.
They were. Okay, I'm fine.
They're in the base.
Yeah, they're in the base, and actually the funding is for even a greater number than the 11 that were included in the bill.
well, there was funding for 11 and there was communication and outreach that goes out to community partners within that $2 million, so.
So, yes, this was all anticipated. What we're doing is making the positions match up. And we have the authority to do that. So the request for us is to exercise that authority on these 4 positions. So I would entertain a motion to take this action. So Representative Wood, you want to make that motion?
Thank you. Yes, so I move to approve the replacement of 4 positions authorized in 2023 Act 76, Section 7, paren B, paren 2, with alternate classifications as detailed in the Department for Children and Families memo dated July 27, 2023.
A second to the motion. Senator Westman. Further discussion or questions? If not, the clerk will call roll.
Senator Brew.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Harrison, yes. Representative Lanfer.
Yes.
Representative Schy.
Yes.
Senator Steers.
Yes.
Senator Westman.
Yes.
Representative Wood.
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
And 0.
Thank you. Thank you. So we are obviously a little behind schedule, and our next item on the agenda is the revenue forecast update, and we have Tom Cabat here, who's the legislature's economist. And we have included in the packet document that is update, and this will be presented again at the e-board in about an hour. So,
Madam Chair, given how late we're running, I'm curious how much time you want us to spend on this particular agenda item.
well, I think the joint fiscal report is going to be very limited. So what I would like to do is 15 minutes, if we could. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And if there are questions that aren't answered in other arenas, I'm happy to field those afterwards individually also. This isn't a seismic change in revenues, in large part because the forecast of done for fiscal 23 came in really close to target across all 3 funds. The miss was 1.2%. And a little bit on the plus side, so $39 million more than had been expected, but on a base of 3.2 billion, that's
About precision.
what?
That's pretty close to precision.
Yeah, that's pretty good. And, you know, that's the hope, is you sort of balance risks. Not everything happens within the subcategories exactly like you think, but that's, you know, that's what we try to do. So also in the macroeconomic environment, not that much has changed. I'd say the picture's a little bit better, but the same forces are at play. And if you just look at the handout, the first 3 full-page charts, which start on page 2, are sort of like what's happening. The first one's inflation, and you can see how it spiked up to 9% a year ago. But it's come down steadily to 3%, which is a little bit better than I think what people thought might be possible, but it's a long way from over. But that's the problem with the economy writ large. So what's being done to address it is the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates to slow the economy and try to check inflation. And it would be a lot more helpful if fiscal policy was aligned with that same goal, but it's not. So everything's happening through interest rate increases, cost of capital, and sectors of the economy that are dependent on credit are really getting hammered, and that's where the slowing is starting. But third slide, the thing that's delaying that to some extent is the enormous wealth that's out there, the enormous spending that's occurred by governments, mostly federal government,
businesses and consumers. So that keeps chugging along. Job growth is chugging along at the national level, and labor markets are still tight. Consumers are still spending. Question is it possible to get lower inflation and still keep that train going? Or, as has been the case through almost all of recent economic history, will the Fed have to get to the point where it's really hitting employment, unemployment goes up, that there's something more akin to a classic recession? I don't think any economist is saying there's not going to be a slowdown of some kind. When you raise interest rates like this, they've gone up 5 basis points in 15 months to the highest level in 22 years. I don't think anybody thinks that's not going to have any effect, but it's been blunted by the massive amounts of money that are out there and still being spent. And that's likely to keep inflation higher, but we'll see. For optimists, the data that came out in the last week was just phenomenal. The personal consumption expenditure price index, which is more what the Fed looks at than the consumer price index, which is what is kind of thought of as headline inflation. It dropped to 3% also. And their target is only 2%. So it's come from 9 to 3. You think, okay, a little bit more and we're done. But it will bounce around. There are a lot of things going on underneath it. Big decline in energy prices was a big part of that. There are charts and things like that in there that speak to that. And so it's an open question. But our outlook hasn't materially changed. Things are going to be much slower in the macro environment in fiscal 24 and 25. And then we're not looking at a big pop back either, because a lot of the fiscal support and stimulus will have preceded by that. But that's the context for the revenue changes that are recommended. They are, again, relatively small compared to the whole budget, but for the most part, positive in the next 2 years in all 3 of those funds, somewhat positive. The biggest increase is in the general fund, which will be about $78 million higher than forecast in January. But remember, there is still a decline in total available general fund revenues in fiscal 24 that is projected. So it's just $78 million less than was expected in January. That is almost entirely due to interest income, which is something that we've never spent that much time analyzing. It's been all of 0 to, almost 0 some years, to maybe 7 or 8 million in a really good year. But the average over the last 45 years, up until not including fiscal 23, has been about $3 million a year. So 45 years, that's about, what you're getting from this. In fiscal 21, it was 0.9. Fiscal 22 was 2.6. Fiscal 23, 56.7. So, this is not a typical situation. There's a chart on page 26 that is the average daily cash balances that the treasurer's looking at. And you can see, so this starts in 2004, chugs along, 200, 300, 400, 500 million, balances. There's some seasonality because you get an April spike with income tax payments and then it gets drawn down. But that's like, every time we run this, we have to change the scale and add more room on the top because it's now over 2.3 billion. And, there are periods it's going up to 2.5, 2.6 at times. And this has happened at the same time that interest rates have gone up to levels that we haven't seen in 22 years. So the opportunity to make money with that is there. And the treasurer's office sort of, has moved into this more and more aggressively. And the returns they're getting are pretty solid. So nothing high risk going on here. You're talking certificates of deposit and treasury notes and things like that. I mean, there's nobody stretching to get return, but they're getting more than 5%, even with a mix of some things that are 1% and 2% that are local area loans and things like that. Anyway, go ahead and ask a question. Yeah,
so this is the interest money on the state's fund.
Yeah, state money, that all of it, it's just, they break it out by fund, general fund.
So earlier, and I guess it's being rediverted because of the flood, but the treasurer wanted to take some of those excess funds, 85 million or so, and use it for other purposes. And now we're going to use that money for flood relief. How is that going to impact this forecast, or is it not?
Drop in the bucket.
Really?
Yeah, 2.3 billion, and you look at the deployment of of the other funds. Yeah.
My other question is, in terms of the general fund forecast, the last couple of months, the personal income has been below target.
Right.
And is that likely to continue?
Yes.
Okay, and we're still going to be ahead of the game because that's the big number.
No, we're seeing, to be clear, we're going to see a decline in between fiscal 23 and fiscal 24 in the available general fund, and a big part of that is personal income.
Okay.
But we're going to see $78 million less of a decline than we had thought back in January, and that's largely because we're going to be getting $79 million, 69 of that will fall to the general fund. So $69 million in interest. And that's a fairly conservative run on the assumptions that we're using for this. Now, that said, it's the first time we've had these data. We've gone through it, we spent a lot of time with the treasurer and his staff, looking at how they're deploying it, looking at the timing, looking at when they expect to draw it down, because a lot of it's, about $1 billion of it's federal funds that have expiration dates and all that kind of thing. So a lot of it gets spent between now and fiscal 26. But I feel like there's upside to this number too. But $69 more million, we had forecast maybe 18, 16, something like that in the prior forecast. So a lot more money from interest. So that's one of the part of the 78. The other big part of it is corporate income. Corporate income had been strong in fiscal 23. And we took it apart at a very granular level with the tax department over the past 2 months and looked at individual files, tried to see the extent to which there's sort of a different floor, because a bunch of things happened at the same time. The pandemic was at play. We moved, though, to market-based sourcing for the basis of the income tax. So it used to be, you'd need employees and a presence in the state and buildings and property to really be the biggest potential payers. And of course, you need a profit on top of that, but all those things would affect the state's take on that. So there were some very big employers that were hardly ever paying an income tax because they didn't have a profit, but it was, there could be bigger corporations outside that were selling to a lot of Vermonters that we weren't really getting much of anything on. So the switch to market-based sourcing appears to really have been a net positive. It's really substantially positive. It's also broadened the base, the tax base for corporate. We did a run looking at fiscal 19 and fiscal 23. In those 2 years, there were only 40% of the payers that paid in fiscal 19 showed up in fiscal 23. That's an enormous churn and shift in the tax base. And it's not as top heavy if you just look at the distributions, and a lot of entities that are huge corporations that sell into Vermont and are enormously profitable. Teeny little, piece of that goes, but it's a teeny little piece of an enormous level of profitability. Doesn't change their business behavior at all. No, none of those companies are saying, oh, because Vermont's now taxing us differently, we're going to do something that, hurts the people of Vermont. We're not going to sell there. We're not going to, it's hardly noticed. And you see this also in the way some of the payments are made and then adjusted and all this kind of thing.
So Tom, what I hear you saying is that yes, personal income is going down a little bit, will probably continue to go down. Our overall revenue is certainly going to go down from our peak during the pandemic with all the federal spending. But we're both rebasing higher than pre-pandemic. The curve is at a new, better place. And we're making up for the personal income loss with some great increases in corporate and interest income. So overall, the picture is looking slightly better than it was before.
Yeah, $78 million better than before. But in the same with corporate, we still expect less from corporate. After doing this analysis, there are also some one-time events and things like that you can identify. And in a world where interest rates are higher, there's less in the way of corporate acquisitions, corporate mergers, things like that. A lot of that's debt financed. So when that gets to be harder, we get big windfalls when those things happen sometimes.
But we're still better off than pre-pandemic.
Oh yeah, we're way better off than pre-pandemic.
Thank you. I think
compared to pre-pandemic
sometimes because we're so stuck in last year.
Oh, no. Yeah. So we have a relative to last year. Okay, it's still dropping, but not by as much. And a relative to last January, which is the basis of the last forecast. And it's better than that, slightly better. But anyway, the changes in the other funds besides the first page. Actually, I think the best revenue graph is not the first page, but get the page number 24, which shows the whole 5 years, which I think is a little bit more useful. By statute, we just forecast 2 years, and it's only the budget is only adopted for 2 years. But we provide this just by way of backdrop because it's not that hard to do, and we started doing it many years ago, just gratis, and we keep it up. But anyway, it's useful because there are some things that are short term, and more there are events that are longer term that are important to understand and plan for. But if you look at the other funds, the transportation fund had the fee bill increases from the last session.
Fee bill, that would really.
It would have been. Well, it was ugly before, which is part of why there's a fee bill. The tax base is not growing quickly for most transportation categories.
Good thing we had that fee bill.
It is a good thing we did.
Well, that's an inflation adjustment. If you don't adjust for inflation, and your base isn't growing very much, you're going to have to get the money somewhere or cut back on what you spend. But so that phases in. There's a little bit in 24 and then, stays there. But again, it doesn't grow a lot because it's based, on numerical counts that are demographic and a little bit economic. But anyway, and the education fund does a little bit better because it's anchored by the big consumption taxes, which are not as cyclical as things like personal income and corporate and all that. It doesn't go up as much when things go up, but it doesn't go down as much when things go down. And it gets about $9 million in interest next year and 7, 5, whatever, on down through the forecast period. So the education fund is a little bit better also. So that's things in a nutshell.
I have a question. There's a chart in here on employment, unemployment, and demographics and wages. Obviously, workforce shortages are driving wages up. I mean, that's, when there are shortages, you're going to pay more. And it just seems like our workforce size, because of demographics and retirements, we're going to be seeing a lot of competition and for workers, and that'll drive wages up, which in turn contributes to inflation. I'm just thinking about just what those workforce dynamics are going to be out into the future, and how those factors are all sort of interrelated.
Yeah, well, that's the $1 trillion question, because that's what the Fed's asking.
Yeah.
They're trying to discern, you know,
They didn't pay me to ask that question.
Okay, well, maybe you should, if there's an answer, that might be worth something.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'll answer the best I can, which is just to say, there are a lot of people that don't think until the labor markets, until the tightness is loosened a bit, that really inflation is going to come down. There are more and more organized work actions too that you see and hear about, but there's definitely upward pressure because supply and demand is dictating that. You know, but expectations are not stratospheric. So, you know, when you look at what the expectations are, they're still anchored fairly low rates, but labor costs are lagging. You know, there'll be a one-year review or sometimes a multi-year contract that somebody has, and they don't respond immediate. Like prices can go up when costs do. You can raise price right away, but the labor cost doesn't usually go up or down like that, and so I think there's going to be pressure for that coming in. One thing I didn't mention was the flood, you know, and so there's a section here on the flood. We finished the macroeconomic forecast about a week before the flood hit. And in order to do analysis that would incorporate that, we would need a lot of detail. That's why I was interested in the discussion before on the losses and what kinds of losses and where they are and which losses are not covered by, you know, insurance, public or private. And we would need a lot more information to do that. We've done these kinds of analyses before. It's a whole field in disaster economics, and there's more and more business in that area. But we've done work for the Army Corps of Engineers in Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, and for the Bureau of the Interior in Colorado with wildfires. And it's often the results are not intuitive when you say, how's this going to affect the economy of the state? It depends on how much outside money is available to come in for remediation. It depends over what time frame you look at, and it depends on a lot of very discrete characteristics about the event. So it is not, though, a no-brainer that because there's a lot of loss, that primarily hits wealth first. So property that's owned as wealth is damaged and out of use. The flows, though, are what determine most revenue categories that we're analyzing. The flows like income, employment, GDP, those sorts of flows, when juiced by a lot of outside money coming in, just like with the pandemic, that's a disaster example, where you can end up with greater flows than you had before because of all this money and the fact that you're not paying for it. It's not your money that's used. In 1927, most of the money that was used for remediation came from the state. There was a little bit of federal money, but nothing like this. It took a decade or so to deal with. Back even further, in 1821, there was a big flood in the southern part of the state, and there were whole communities that just disappeared. You know, the records would just say pretty much everybody just up and left. You get that kind of behavior, you're going to have a big economic response, but that's not likely to be what's happening here. You could tell from the conversation. So it's not a slam dunk that, oh, we should lower the forecast because of that. It certainly could affect some of the timing. And if, as we get more data and information, we can circle back and maybe do some runs on that. But right now, it's not a part of it. And it's not like I would say automatically, oh, we should lower it or raise it or something.
I think on that note, we're going to have some lunch before you go to the board.
That's fine. I hope you guys have time.
as well. And now we have poor Catherine.
I will be fast.
So we'll see you.
Yes, you all have received Catherine Benham, Chief Fiscal Officer of the Fiscal Office, you all have received the Fiscal Officer's report. You've heard a lot today already. There's actually some nice summaries of some of the key revenues, how they compare, what they're up or down from your forecast issues, individual funds. There's other updates and closeouts in the education fund.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Gotta get this when revenues go up.
We're doing some stuff with the renewable energy summer study is moving ahead. We've signed contracts, so we're doing that on other summer studies that are moving forward. I want to draw your attention to that we're recruiting for 2 positions in our office, one for the Senate Appropriations Committee, and some of you may or may not know that Dan Dickerson has gone to be, I forget his title, is it the ACCD? She's the Director of Finance and Administration, something in ACCD. So we have an agreement where he is still continuing to produce someone for us and while we produce replacement. But if you know of anybody who's interested or a good fit, the links are on the end of your fiscal note. And I think I don't know if anybody has any questions about anything, and I feel like you all probably need to go get ready for the next.
We have had no break since 9 o'clock this morning, so thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I believe the chair has the authority to adjourn the meeting, and so that is exactly what I'm going to do. This meeting is adjourned.